The great hall of Blackwood fell silent the moment Damien raised his hand. Every wolf in the room turned to look at Elena, who stood alone in the center of the stone floor, her hands pressed against her stomach, as if she could shield the life inside her from what was coming. She had been called before the pack without warning, pulled from her chambers by 2 guards who would not meet her eyes. Now she understood why. Damien did not look like the man who had once promised to protect her. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold, and in his hand he held a folded letter that had been placed there only an hour earlier by his closest advisor, Corinne. Elena did not need to read the letter to know what it said. She could see the accusation written across her husband's face already. "You have been named a traitor to this pack," Damien said, his voice carrying through the hall like a blade cutting through fog. "Letters found in your chambers prove contact with the Thornfield pack. Contact you never reported to me." Elena's chest tightened. "Those letters are not mine. I have never written to anyone in Thornfield. Damien, please, look at me. You know me." "I thought I did," he said. The elders around the hall murmured, their voices rising and falling like a tide Elena could not stop. She searched the crowd for a single friendly face, someone who might speak on her behalf, but every gaze dropped the moment it met hers. Fear did that to people. Fear of an alpha's anger was stronger than loyalty to the truth. Corinne stood just behind Damien's shoulder, her expression carefully arranged into something that looked like sorrow. Elena caught the flicker in her eyes, the smallest twitch of satisfaction, gone before anyone else could notice it. Elena had always sensed something sharp beneath Corinne's calm words, but she had never imagined the woman would go this far. "I carry your child," Elena said, her voice breaking. "Our child. Would I betray you and risk everything we built together?" For a moment, something shifted in Damien's face, a flicker of doubt. Elena held her breath, hoping it would grow, hoping he would ask one more question, examine one more piece of evidence, give her one more chance to explain. But the elders were watching him too, waiting to see if their alpha would show weakness in front of the whole pack. Damien straightened his shoulders instead. "The law of this pack does not bend for feelings," he said. "You have brought shame to the Blackwood name. As of this moment, you are stripped of your title as Luna. You will leave this territory before nightfall, and you will not return." The words hit Elena harder than any physical blow could have. She stumbled back a step, her hand gripping the edge of a nearby pillar to keep herself standing. "Damien, you cannot mean this. Think of our child. Think of what you are throwing away." "Take her to the border," Damien said to the guards, refusing to look at her again. The 2 guards stepped forward, their expressions apologetic but their duty absolute. One of them, a younger wolf named Callum, reached for Elena's arm gently, as if trying to soften what he could not stop. Elena pulled away from him, taking one last look at the man she had loved since she was 16 years old. "You will regret this," she whispered, so quiet that only Damien could hear it. "Not because of me, because of what you are about to lose." Damien said nothing. He turned and walked out of the hall before she could see whatever expression crossed his face next. Elena was left standing among strangers, who had once called her their Luna, now looking at her like she was already gone. The guards led her through the long corridors of the pack house, past rooms she had decorated herself, past the garden where she had planned to raise her child, past the study where Damien used to read to her in the evenings, when the pack's problems felt far away. Every step reminded her of a life that was ending in front of her eyes. Outside, the sky had turned a heavy gray, threatening rain. Elena wrapped her arms around herself as the guards escorted her toward the northern gate, the one that marked the edge of Blackwood territory. A small crowd had gathered along the path, drawn by whispers that had already spread faster than truth ever could. Some looked at her with pity. Others looked away entirely, unwilling to be associated with a fallen Luna. Near the gate, Elena spotted a familiar face. Old Gareth, one of the pack's senior warriors, stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face lined with something that looked like concern. He had served under Damien's father, and had always treated Elena with quiet respect. As she passed him, he stepped forward slightly. "My lady," he said softly, careful not to draw attention, "are you certain of what you told the Alpha? About the letters?" "I have never seen those letters before tonight," Elena said. "Someone placed them to make me look guilty. I do not know why, but I know it was not me." Gareth's eyes flicked toward the pack house, where Corinne could be seen watching from a high window. He said nothing more, but Elena saw the doubt settle into his expression. the same doubt she had seen briefly in Damien's eyes. It gave her no comfort now. Doubt would not stop the guards from walking her to the border. At the gate, Callum finally spoke again. "I am sorry, my lady. I do not believe what they are saying about you. But orders are orders." "I understand," Elena said, and she meant it. She did not blame the young guard for doing what he was told. She saved her anger for the ones who had built this trap around her. The gate opened, revealing the dark forest beyond Blackwood's borders, a place Elena had never been allowed to enter alone. Wolves like her did not survive long outside pack protection, especially not one carrying a child. But she had no choice now. Staying meant death, or worse, a slow erasure of everything she once was. "Please," she said one final time to Callum, "if you ever get the chance, tell Damien, the truth will come out. Tell him I never stopped being loyal to him, even when he stopped believing in me." Callum nodded, though Elena could see in his eyes that he doubted he would ever have the courage to say such words to his alpha. She stepped through the gate anyway, the cold air of the unclaimed forest wrapping around her like a warning. Behind her, the gate closed with a heavy sound that echoed through the trees. Elena stood there for a long moment, staring at the wooden barrier that now separated her from everything she had known. She placed both hands over her stomach, feeling the small movement inside her, a reminder that she was not truly alone, not yet. "We will be all right," she whispered, though she did not know if it was true. "I will keep you safe. I promise you that." She turned away from the gate and began walking, her steps unsteady, on the uneven forest floor. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold against her skin, soaking through the thin dress she had been wearing when the guards first found her. She had no coat, no supplies, nothing but the small pouch of silver coins her mother had given her years ago, hidden in the folds of her dress out of habit rather than planning. The forest grew darker as she walked deeper into it, the last light of the gray sky fading behind thick clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a sound that once would have felt like home, but now made her shiver with uncertainty. She did not know if it belonged to a friend or a stranger, and out here, she could not afford to find out. Elena thought of Damien's face, as he had condemned her, searching her memory for any sign that he had wanted to believe her, any hint that he might come after her once the anger faded and the truth surfaced. But she forced herself to stop hoping. Hope, she realized, was a dangerous thing to carry into the wilderness. It would slow her down when she needed to move, and it would break her heart again if it turned out to be false. Instead, she focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of her footsteps, on the small flutter of movement inside her that reminded her why she needed to keep going. Whatever happened next, whatever became of Damien, of Blackwood, of the pack she had once called home, she would protect the life growing inside her, with everything she had left. The rain grew heavier, as night fell completely, and Elena pulled her arms tighter around herself, searching for any shelter she could find. She did not know these lands. She did not know which paths were safe and which belonged to hostile packs who would not hesitate to punish an unprotected wolf wandering through their territory. But she kept walking, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up was not something she was willing to do. Somewhere far behind her, in the warmth of the Blackwood pack house, Damien stood alone in his study, staring at the letter Corinne had given him. For the first time since the trial, a small doubt crept into his mind, quiet but persistent, like a splinter he could not quite remove. He told himself it did not matter. The decision had been made. The pack had witnessed it. There was no going back now. But even as he told himself this, some part of him wondered if he had just made the greatest mistake of his life. Deep in the forest, Elena found a hollow beneath the roots of a fallen tree and pressed herself into it, hoping the wood would shield her from both the rain and any eyes that might be watching. She had not eaten since morning, and hunger gnawed at her stomach, along with the fear that refused to leave her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but sleep would not come. Every sound in the darkness made her flinch. Every snap of a branch made her wonder if something dangerous was moving closer. Near midnight, she heard footsteps that were not her own. Slow, deliberate steps moving through the underbrush, circling somewhere beyond the hollow where she hid. Elena held her breath, pressing herself flatter against the cold dirt, praying whatever it was would pass by without noticing her. She had no strength left to run, and no pack to call for help if she needed it. The steps stopped close to the fallen tree. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give her away. Through a gap in the roots, she caught a glimpse of gray fur and pale eyes reflecting what little moonlight broke through the clouds. A lone wolf, likely a scout from a neighboring territory, sniffing the air as if it had caught her scent but could not quite place it. Elena did not move. She thought of nothing but stillness, of becoming as invisible as the shadows around her. The wolf paused for what felt like an eternity, its head turning slowly in her direction. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and moved on, disappearing into the darker parts of the forest, without ever discovering her hiding place. Only when the sound of its steps faded completely, did Elena allow herself to breathe again. Tears she had been holding back all day finally broke free, running silently down her face as she curled into herself beneath the roots. She was safe for now, but she understood clearly how fragile that safety was. One misstep, one careless sound, and the forest would not be so forgiving a second time. She thought of Damien again, unable to stop herself despite every effort to push him from her mind. She wondered if he was thinking of her too, sitting in the pack house he had chosen over her, surrounded by the comfort and safety she no longer had. She wondered if Corinne had already begun celebrating her victory, confident that Elena would either die in the wilderness or vanish forever, never to threaten her position again. "I will not give her that satisfaction," Elena whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain still falling outside her hollow shelter. "I will survive this. Both of us will survive this." She rested her hand over her stomach again, feeling the small shift of movement that told her the child within her was still safe, still strong despite everything. It gave her the strength to close her eyes once more, and this time, exhaustion finally pulled her into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When morning came, gray light filtering weakly through the leaves above her, Elena woke stiff and cold, her body aching from the hard ground beneath her. She crawled out from the hollow slowly, checking her surroundings before standing fully. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving the forest dripping and quiet, the kind of silence that made her feel both safer and more exposed at once. She had no map, no clear direction, only a vague memory of stories about the Ashwood territory lying somewhere to the east, a place known for taking in wanderers without asking too many questions about their past. It was not much to go on, but it was the only plan she had. Elena picked a direction based on the position of the rising sun and began walking once more, her legs heavy, but her resolve unshaken. As she moved deeper away from Blackwood's borders, she allowed herself one final thought of the life she was leaving behind, the garden she would never finish planting, the nursery she had begun preparing in secret, hoping to surprise Damien with it once the child arrived, the quiet mornings they used to share, before the pressures of leading a pack pulled him further from her each day. All of it was gone now, replaced by an uncertain path through unfamiliar territory, and a future she would have to build entirely on her own. She did not know yet how long that path would be, or what waited for her at the end of it. She only knew she could not go back, and she would not stop moving forward, not while there was still breath in her body and life growing inside her. By the third day of walking, Elena's legs had gone numb beneath her, and every breath felt like it scraped against her ribs. She pressed herself against a boulder as the sound of voices carried through the trees ahead, low and rough, speaking a dialect she barely recognized, a patrol. She had crossed into territory that did not belong to Blackwood or Ashwood, land claimed by wolves who had no reason to be kind to a stranger wandering alone and unprotected. She counted 3 voices, maybe 4, moving along a ridge just above the small ravine where she had taken shelter. If they found her, there would be no explanation that could save her. Unclaimed wolves crossing hostile land without permission were treated as threats first and questioned later, if they were questioned at all. Elena pressed her hand over her stomach, willing her own breathing to slow, willing the child inside her to stay still and silent, as if it somehow understood the danger they were both in. The voices grew louder, then paused directly above her hiding place. Elena closed her eyes, bracing herself for the moment she would be discovered, already trying to think of what she might say, what plea might convince strangers to let a pregnant, exiled Luna pass through their land unharmed. But the voices shifted direction instead, moving further along the ridge, the patrol continuing its route, without ever glancing down into the ravine where she hid. She waited until the sound faded completely, before daring to move again, her whole body trembling from the effort of staying still and silent for so long. Hunger had become a constant companion by now, gnawing steadily at her insides, and she had begun searching for anything edible along her path. Berries she recognized from her childhood, roots that Mabel would later teach her sons to identify with far more skill than she possessed now. That night, she found a small stream and drank from it carefully, cupping the cold water in her hands. She ate a handful of berries she had gathered earlier, unsure if they were safe but too hungry to resist the risk. Her body felt weaker with each passing hour, and she knew she could not continue at this pace for much longer. She needed rest, real food, and shelter that did not depend on hiding beneath fallen trees and praying no one found her. She thought of turning back more than once during that third night, imagining herself walking through Blackwood's gates and begging for mercy, offering to prove her innocence if only someone would listen. But she knew what waited for her there. Corinne's influence had grown too strong, and Damien's trust in her had shattered too completely for a plea to change anything now. Going back meant walking into a trap with no way out. Moving forward, however uncertain, at least offered the possibility of safety. By the fourth day, Elena's steps had slowed to a stagger, each one requiring more effort than the last. The forest around her had begun to thin, tall trees giving way to rolling hills, dotted with smaller clusters of trees, and open fields she did not recognize. She had no way of knowing if this meant she was close to Ashwood territory or simply lost in unfamiliar land, but the change in scenery gave her a small flicker of hope she desperately needed. She pushed herself up a low hill, her vision blurring at the edges from exhaustion and hunger. At the top, she saw smoke rising in the distance, thin gray trails curling up from what looked like a small village nestled between two hills. It was the first sign of settled life she had seen since leaving Blackwood, and despite every warning telling her to be cautious, relief flooded through her chest. She started down the hill toward the smoke, her pace quickening despite her exhaustion, driven by the desperate hope that this village might offer shelter, food, anything that could help her survive long enough to reach true safety. But halfway down the slope, her legs finally gave out beneath her, weakened beyond their limit by days of walking, with almost nothing to sustain her. She fell hard against the grass, pain shooting through her knees and palms, the world spinning around her, as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. "Please," she whispered to no one, to whatever force might be listening, "just a little further. Please let me make it a little further." She tried to push herself up again, but her arms trembled too badly to support her weight. The smoke in the distance blurred into a gray smudge as her vision failed her completely, and the last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the soft, damp smell of grass pressed against her cheek, and the faint, distant sound of someone calling out, their voice growing louder as they ran toward her. When Elena opened her eyes again, she was lying on a soft bed inside a small wooden cottage, sunlight filtering gently through a window covered with simple cloth curtains. For a moment, she panicked, unsure of where she was or how she had gotten there, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach to check that the child within her was still safe. A soft, warm feeling of movement answered her fear, and she let out a shaky breath of relief. "You are safe, dear," said a gentle voice from across the room. Elena turned to see an older woman sitting near a small fire, her gray hair tied back loosely, her hands busy with some kind of needlework. The woman's face was lined with age but kind, her eyes holding none of the suspicion Elena had expected from a stranger. "My name is Mabel. I found you collapsed on the hill outside my home 2 days ago. You have been sleeping ever since, though I managed to get some broth into you now and then." 2 days, Elena repeated, struggling to sit up. "I need to keep moving. I cannot stay here. I cannot put you at risk." "Hush now," Mabel said firmly, setting aside her needlework and moving to Elena's side. "You are in no condition to walk anywhere. Whatever trouble follows you, it will still be there tomorrow. Rest first. Talk later, if you wish to talk at all." Elena studied the older woman's face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that Mabel might report her presence to someone who could send word back to Blackwood. But she found nothing except quiet patience, the kind of patience that came from a woman who had likely seen many strangers pass through her life, and had learned not to ask too many questions about where they came from, or why they were running. "I do not wish to bring danger to your home," Elena said softly. "Then don't," Mabel replied simply. "Whatever chased you here, it does not know where you are, and unless you tell someone, it never will. This village keeps its own secrets, dear. We are used to strangers arriving with stories they would rather not share. You will not be the first, and you will not be the last. Something in Mabel's calm certainty eased the tight knot of fear that had lived in Elena's chest since the moment she stepped through Blackwood's gates. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that survival might actually be possible, that she and her unborn child might find a place in this world after all, far from the pack that had cast her aside. Over the following weeks, Elena slowly regained her strength under Mabel's care, learning the rhythms of the small village called Ashwood's Edge, a settlement that existed on the outer boundary of the larger Ashwood pack territory, but operated independently enough that questions about pack politics rarely reached its quiet streets. Mabel, it turned out, had once been a healer within a pack herself, decades ago, before choosing a quieter life, away from the constant power struggles that came with pack leadership. I have seen what ambition does to good people, Mabel told her one evening, as Elena helped prepare herbs for the village's small clinic. It turns them into something they never wanted to become. Whatever happened to you, wherever you came from, I imagine ambition played its part somewhere in the story. Elena said nothing, unwilling yet to share the full truth of her past, but she nodded slightly, and Mabel seemed to understand that some wounds needed more time before they could be spoken aloud. As the weeks passed, Elena began to feel less like a fugitive hiding from her past, and more like a woman quietly building a new life, one herb garden and one village friendship at a time. She still thought of Damien often, especially in the quiet hours before sleep, wondering if he had discovered the truth yet, wondering if he regretted the decision that had sent her running into the wilderness alone. But those thoughts came less frequently, as her belly grew larger, and the reality of impending motherhood demanded more and more of her attention. One afternoon, as Elena rested in the small garden behind Mabel's cottage, a traveling merchant passed through Ashwood's Edge, his cart loaded with cloth and tools from distant territories. Word spread quickly through the village whenever a new face arrived, and curiosity drew several villagers toward the market square to see what goods he carried. Elena, feeling stronger than she had in weeks, decided to join them, eager for a small taste of normal life after months of hiding and fear. The merchant, a talkative man named Edwin, spoke freely about the news he had gathered from the territories he passed through, sharing stories the way traveling merchants often did to draw customers closer to his cart. Elena listened with half-interest until she heard the name Blackwood mentioned among his tales, and her whole body went rigid with sudden attention. "Strange happenings over there, I hear," Edwin was saying to a small cluster of villagers. "Their alpha banished his own Luna some months back, accused her of betrayal. Word is, the pack has been unsettled ever since. Crops failing, disputes rising between families that never quarreled before. Some say the land itself is unhappy with the decision." Elena's heart pounded as she listened, torn between the urge to ask questions and the fear of drawing attention to herself. Mabel, standing nearby, noticed the sudden tension in her posture and moved closer, placing a steady hand on Elena's shoulder, as if silently warning her to remain calm. "Do they know why she was accused?" one of the villagers asked, clearly enjoying the drama of the story more than concerned with its truth. "Something about secret letters, is what I heard," Edwin replied, shrugging. "Though who really knows the truth in these pack matters? Politics is a messy business, especially when ambition gets involved. I heard whispers that the Alpha's own advisor benefited greatly from the Luna's disappearance, stepped right into her role of influence, if not her title." Elena forced herself to walk away before her expression betrayed anything further, Mabel following close behind her, saying nothing, until they were safely back within the walls of the cottage. Once inside, Elena finally allowed the tears she had been holding back to fall freely, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her face. "They know," she whispered. "Even strangers passing through know what happened to me, and they still believe I am guilty. Rumors change shape with every mouth that repeats them," Mabel said gently, sitting beside her. "But you heard something important in that merchant's story. People are questioning the accusation now, wondering about the timing of it, about who truly benefited. That is more than you had before." Elena wiped her eyes, forcing herself to steady her breathing. "It does not matter what people question from a distance. Nothing changes unless the truth reaches Damien himself, and he is not likely to listen, even if it does." "Perhaps not now," Mabel agreed. "But time changes many things, dear." Guilt has a way of growing louder the longer it is ignored. If your husband truly loved you as you say he once did, that guilt will not stay silent forever. Elena did not fully believe Mabel's words that day, still too raw from months of grief and fear to hold on to hope so easily. But she kept the merchant's story tucked away in her memory nonetheless, a small seed of possibility that perhaps, someday, the truth would find its way back to where it belonged. As the final weeks of her pregnancy passed, Mabel began noticing details that made her increasingly certain of something Elena had not yet considered. The size and position of Elena's stomach, the particular way she carried the weight, the subtle signs Mabel had learned to recognize during her many years as a healer within a pack. She said nothing at first, waiting until she was certain before sharing her suspicion with Elena during a quiet evening near the fire. "I believe you are carrying more than one child," Mabel said carefully, watching Elena's reaction closely. "Twins, unless I am very much mistaken. I have seen the signs enough times to trust my judgment on this." Elena stared at her, stunned into silence for a long moment. She placed both hands over her stomach, feeling the familiar movements she had grown used to over the past months, movements she had never once questioned as belonging to more than one child. "Twins," she repeated softly, testing the word as if it needed to be spoken aloud to become real. "Damien and I always hoped for children, but we never spoke of twins specifically. It happens more often in strong bloodlines," Mabel said. "Alpha lines especially. If your husband truly carries strong blood, it does not surprise me that his children would announce themselves as two rather than one." Elena felt a strange mixture of fear and wonder settle over her at the realization. Two children meant double the responsibility, double the danger if anyone ever discovered who their father truly was. But it also meant something else, something Elena could not quite name yet. It felt, somehow, like a quiet promise that whatever she had lost at Blackwood, she was being given something extraordinary in return, something worth protecting, with everything she had left to give. "We will keep this quiet," Elena said finally, her voice steady despite the uncertainty still swirling inside her. "No one beyond this cottage needs to know the details of their birth, not yet, perhaps not for many years." Mabel nodded in agreement, understanding without needing further explanation why such secrecy mattered so deeply. "Then we shall prepare quietly, together, for two children instead of one. Whatever comes next, you will not face it alone, dear. I promise you that." Elena reached out and took the older woman's hand, grateful beyond words for the kindness of a stranger, who had asked for nothing in return, except the chance to help someone in need. As the fire crackled softly beside them, Elena allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine a future where her children grew up safe and strong, far from the politics and betrayal that had once threatened to destroy them all, before they had even taken their first breath. Pain tore through Elena's body without warning, doubling her over in the middle of the small kitchen where she had been helping Mabel prepare the evening meal. She gripped the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles white, as another wave hit harder than the last. Mabel dropped what she was holding immediately, rushing to her side. "It is time," Mabel said firmly, guiding Elena toward the bed in the next room. "Breathe through it, dear. I have delivered more children than I can count. You are in good hands." The labor lasted through the night and well into the following morning, longer and more difficult than either woman had expected. Elena's cries echoed through the small cottage as Mabel worked steadily beside her, offering both medical skill and quiet encouragement in equal measure. Just past dawn, the first cry of a newborn finally broke through the tension in the room, sharp and strong, filling Elena with a relief so powerful it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "A boy," Mabel announced, wrapping the child gently before placing him against Elena's chest. But before Elena could fully absorb the joy of holding her son for the first time, Mabel's expression shifted with sudden alertness. "There is another. Stay strong. A little longer, dear." Barely 20 minutes later, a second cry joined the first, and Mabel placed another boy into Elena's waiting arms, this one slightly smaller than his brother, but equally strong in his cries. Elena stared down at her two sons, exhaustion forgotten in the overwhelming wave of love that swept through her. She had known twins were coming, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of holding both of them at once, two small lives she would now protect with everything she had. "Cale," she whispered, looking at the firstborn, before turning to the second, and Ronan. The names had come to her months earlier, in quiet moments when she allowed herself to imagine this exact scene, though she had never told anyone, not even Mabel, what she planned to call her children. Now, Holding them both, the names felt like they had always belonged to these two small faces, staring up at her with dark, curious eyes. Mabel watched the scene with a soft smile, though something in her expression suggested she was already noticing details Elena had not yet considered. "They are strong," she said quietly. "Stronger than most newborns I have delivered. Look at how quickly they settled, how alert their eyes already are." "That is not ordinary, dear." Elena looked down at her sons again, seeing for the first time what Mabel meant. Most newborn wolves took hours, sometimes days, to fully calm after birth, their senses overwhelmed by the sudden shift from womb to world. Kale and Ronan, however, had already stopped crying entirely, their small eyes tracking movement around the room, with an awareness that seemed far beyond their age. "They carry their father's blood," Elena said softly, equal parts pride and worry threading through her voice. "Strong blood. I always knew, but I did not expect to see it so soon." "Then we must be careful," Mabel said, her tone turning serious. "Strength like this draws attention, even in children. If anyone outside this cottage notices what I am noticing now, questions will follow. Questions about their father, about where such strength comes from." Elena nodded, understanding immediately the weight of what Mabel was saying. She had already decided, long before the twins arrived, that she would protect them from the truth of their bloodline for as long as possible, raising them away from the politics and danger that had once destroyed her own life. Now, holding the proof of that bloodline in her arms, she understood just how difficult that promise might be to keep. The following months passed in a blur of exhausted joy, as Elena adjusted to caring for two infants at once, learning their different personalities almost immediately despite their identical appearance. Kale, the firstborn, cried louder and demanded attention more directly, showing an early stubbornness that reminded Elena, uncomfortably, of Damien in his more difficult moments. Ronan, by contrast, watched everything quietly, his dark eyes studying his surroundings, with a patience unusual for a child so young. Mabel helped whenever her healing duties allowed, teaching Elena the practical skills of motherhood, while also quietly observing the twins for any signs of the strength she had noticed at their birth. By the time they were crawling, both boys had begun showing physical abilities well beyond what other village children their age displayed, pulling themselves upright weeks earlier than expected, moving with a coordination that seemed almost unnatural for infants. "We will need a story," Mabel said one evening, as they watched the twins playing quietly on a blanket near the fire. "Villagers will start asking questions eventually, about their father, about why he is not here, about why they seem stronger than other children their age." Elena had already considered this many times during long nights when sleep would not come. "I will tell them their father died before they were born," she said finally. "It is close enough to the truth to feel real, and it explains his absence without inviting further questions." Mabel nodded slowly. A reasonable choice. Grief tends to close conversations rather than open them. People will offer sympathy rather than suspicion. And so, as the twins grew from infants into curious toddlers, the story became simply understood throughout Ashwood's Edge that Elena was a widow, her husband lost to unfortunate circumstances before he could meet his sons. No one questioned the story too deeply, especially given how quietly Elena lived, working modestly as a seamstress in the village, while Mabel continued her role as the settlement's trusted healer. By the time Kale and Ronan were 5 years old, their physical abilities had become impossible to entirely hide, though Elena worked hard to teach them control and restraint from an early age. She watched them practice patience during village games, deliberately holding back the full extent of their speed and strength, so as not to draw unwanted attention from other parents, who might begin wondering why two fatherless boys from a humble seamstress showed such unusual capability. "Why must we hold back, Mama?" Kale asked one evening, frustration evident in his young voice after another day of deliberately losing foot races against slower village children. "I could win every time if you let me try properly." Elena knelt down to meet her son's eyes directly, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes, being the strongest does not mean showing everyone how strong you are. Sometimes, it means showing patience, especially when others cannot understand why you are different. There will be a time for your strength to matter, Kale. That time is not now. Ronan, sitting quietly nearby as he often did during these conversations, spoke up with the thoughtfulness that had already begun defining his character. "Are we different because of our father?" he asked. "The one who died before we were born?" Elena hesitated, caught between the comfort of the simple story she had told for years and the deeper truth she knew she would eventually need to share. "Your father was someone important," she said carefully, choosing words that were true without revealing everything. "That importance is part of why you both carry such strength. But strength without wisdom causes far more harm than good. That is what I am trying to teach you both, more than anything else." The boys accepted her answer, as children often do, filing it away without demanding further explanation, though Elena noticed Ronan's expression remained thoughtful long after the conversation ended, as if he sensed there was more to the story than his mother had shared. She wondered, not for the first time, how much longer she would be able to keep the full truth hidden from her increasingly perceptive sons. That night, after the twins had finally settled into sleep, Elena sat with Mabel near the fire, discussing the growing challenge of maintaining their careful secrecy. "They grow more curious with each passing year," Elena admitted. "Ronan especially. He notices things other children would never think to question." "Children always do eventually," Mabel said gently. "The question is not whether they will discover the truth, dear, but when, and how you wish for them to learn it. Better it comes from you, in your own time, than from a stranger's careless words, or a chance encounter with someone from your past." Elena stared into the fire, considering Mabel's words carefully. She knew the day would come, when she could no longer protect her sons with careful stories and gentle deflections. But for now, watching them sleep peacefully in the next room, safe and unaware of the danger that had once threatened their very existence, she allowed herself to believe she still had time before that reckoning arrived. A few months later, an incident occurred that tested every careful precaution Elena had built around her sons. The village children had gathered near the old stone well at the edge of Ashwood's Edge, a place parents often warned their children to avoid due to its worn, crumbling edge. Cale and Ronan, now 6 years old, had joined the group reluctantly, more interested in watching the older children play than participating directly. A younger girl named Lucy, barely 4 years old, wandered too close to the loose stones lining the well's edge, while chasing after a stray cat. The stones gave way beneath her small feet, and before anyone could react, she tumbled over the edge with a sharp cry that froze every child nearby in horrified silence. Ronan moved first, faster than should have been possible for a child his age, closing the distance to the well in a blur that left the other children staring in stunned confusion. He caught Lucy's wrist just as she disappeared over the edge, his small body straining against weight that should have pulled him over as well, if not for strength far beyond what any 6-year-old should possess. Cale arrived a heartbeat later, gripping his brother around the waist and pulling backward with equal, impossible strength, anchoring them both against the well's edge until Ronan could haul Lucy back up to safety. The entire rescue took only seconds, but every child who witnessed it stood frozen, staring at the twins with wide, uncertain eyes. Word of the rescue spread through the village before Elena even learned what had happened, and by the time she arrived at the well, breathless with worry after hearing the commotion, several parents had already gathered, their expressions a complicated mixture of gratitude and unease. Lucy's mother wept as she embraced her daughter, thanking Ronan repeatedly, but even through her tears, Elena noticed the woman's eyes lingering on the twins, with a wariness that had not been there before. "How did they move so fast?" one father asked quietly to another, not intending for Elena to overhear. "No child moves like that, not even the strongest pack pups I have seen." Elena gathered her sons close, thanking the gathered villagers for their concern, before quickly leading Cale and Ronan back toward their cottage, her heart pounding with a fear entirely separate from the danger Lucy had just survived. She had spent 6 years carefully hiding exactly this kind of display, and now, in a single impulsive act of heroism, her sons had revealed far more than she had ever intended anyone to see. That evening, Mabel arrived at the cottage with news that confirmed Elena's worst fears. "The village elder wishes to speak with you," she said gently but seriously. "Old Garrick noticed the strength your sons showed today. He served in a pack himself, decades ago, before settling here. He recognizes what such strength usually means." Elena's stomach tightened with dread. "Does he suspect who their father is?" "He suspects they carry strong bloodline, at the very least," Mabel said. "Whether he connects it specifically to Blackwood, I cannot say. But you should prepare yourself for questions, dear. Difficult ones." The following day, Elena visited Garrick's modest home at the edge of the village, leaving the twins in Mabel's care to avoid drawing further attention. Garrick, an elderly wolf with sharp eyes despite his advanced age, received her with a politeness that did little to ease her nervousness. "Your sons showed remarkable strength yesterday," he said without preamble, once she was seated across from him. "Strength I have not seen in village-born children in all my years here. I served in a pack once myself, long before choosing this quiet life. I know the signs of strong bloodline when I see them." Elena chose her words carefully, drawing on the careful practice of half-truths she had perfected over the years. "Their father carried strong blood," she said. "I have never denied that, though I prefer not to discuss the details of his identity or his family's standing. He is gone now, and I wish only to raise my sons peacefully, away from whatever politics his bloodline might invite." Garrick studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I will not press you for details you clearly wish to keep private," he said finally. "But understand this, child. Strength like your sons possess rarely stays hidden forever, no matter how carefully you try to conceal it. Someday, someone will recognize it for what it truly is, and you would do well to prepare your sons for that day, rather than simply hoping it never arrives." Elena thanked him for his discretion, though his words lingered in her mind long after she returned home that evening. She watched her sons playing quietly by the fire, blissfully unaware of the conversation that had taken place on their behalf, and felt the familiar weight of her secret pressing more heavily against her chest than it had in years. "We must be more careful," she told Mabel later that night, once the twins had gone to sleep. "Garrick suspects strong bloodline, though he did not press for specifics. But he is right about one thing. This cannot stay hidden forever." "No," Mabel agreed quietly. "It cannot. But perhaps that is not entirely a tragedy, dear. Your sons will grow into remarkable young wolves, whether the world knows their full story or not. The question is simply when, and how, that story finally comes to light." Elena said nothing further that night, staring instead into the dying embers of the fire, wondering how many more years she truly had, before the careful walls she had built around her son's true identity finally began to crumble entirely, revealing a truth that had been waiting patiently, all this time, to reshape all of their futures once again. Damien woke gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, the image of Elena's face still burning behind his eyes. It was the same dream that had haunted him for years now, always the same moment, replaying endlessly, the trial, the accusation, her pleading voice asking him to look at her, to truly see her, before he condemned her to the wilderness. He sat up in the darkness of his chambers, running a hand through his hair, trying to shake the weight of a guilt that refused to fade no matter how many years passed. 7 years had gone by since that night, 7 years during which Blackwood had slowly, steadily weakened, though Damien had convinced himself for a long time that the decline was simply bad fortune rather than consequence. Crops failed more often than they used to. Disputes between families that had once been peaceful now flared into open conflict with troubling regularity. Even the pack's bond, that invisible thread connecting every wolf to their alpha, felt thinner somehow, stretched too far without the balancing presence of a true Luna. He rose from his bed and moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit territory that had once felt entirely secure under his leadership. Now, 7 years later, he could not shake the growing suspicion that something had gone deeply wrong the night he banished Elena, something beyond the simple loss of a wife he had once loved deeply. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Corinne entered without waiting for his response, as she often did these days, having risen steadily through the pack's ranks to become his closest and most trusted advisor. She carried herself with the same calm confidence she always projected, though Damien had begun noticing, in recent months, small inconsistencies in her stories that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "You are troubled again," Corinne observed, her tone carrying practiced concern. "The same dream?" "Always the same dream," Damien admitted, turning from the window. "Sometimes I wonder if it is simply guilt, or if it is something else entirely. Some part of me refusing to accept a decision I have never fully understood." Corinne's expression remained calm, though something flickered briefly behind her eyes, gone before Damien could fully register it. "You made the only decision you could, given the evidence before you," she said smoothly. "Dwelling on it now serves no purpose, except to weaken your resolve as Alpha." "Perhaps," Damien said, though doubt continued gnawing at him more persistently than he let on. "Tell me again, Corinne, how exactly those letters came into your possession. I do not recall you ever fully explaining where you found them. The question caught Corinne slightly off guard, though she recovered quickly, her voice smooth and practiced as always. I found them hidden among Elena's belongings during a routine inspection of the Luna's chambers. As I have told you before, I brought them to you immediately, as was my duty. A routine inspection, Damien repeated slowly. One you conducted alone, without informing me beforehand. I did not wish to trouble you with suspicions until I had proof, Corinne said. It seemed the responsible course of action at the time. Damien studied her carefully, something in her explanation continuing to nag at him, though he could not quite articulate what specifically bothered him. He had asked variations of this same question several times over the years, each time receiving an answer that sounded reasonable on its surface, but never quite settled the growing unease building steadily within him. Elsewhere in the pack house, an elder named Fenwick had also begun noticing inconsistencies that troubled him deeply. Fenwick had served the Blackwood pack for over 4 decades, first under Damien's father, and now under Damien himself, and he possessed a memory sharp enough to recall details others had long since forgotten. He remembered, clearly, conversations from 7 years earlier that did not quite match the story now commonly accepted throughout the pack. That evening, Fenwick sought out Gareth, the aging warrior who had once questioned Elena's guilt on the very night of her banishment. The two men met privately in Fenwick's modest quarters, away from the ears of anyone who might report their conversation back to Corinne. I have been thinking about the night the Luna was banished, Fenwick said without preamble, once they were settled and certain of their privacy. Something has never sat right with me about how quickly everything unfolded. The accusation, the evidence, the sentence, all within a single evening, with no time given for proper investigation. Gareth nodded slowly, his weathered face grave. I have wondered the same thing myself, more times than I care to admit. Elena asked me, as she was led away, whether I believed the accusations against her. I told her I did not know what to believe. In truth, I never fully believed it, not even then. Corinne benefited greatly from that night, Fenwick continued carefully. She has risen to become the Alpha's closest advisor, holding influence she never possessed, while Elena remained Luna. It troubles me how convenient her rise has been, built directly upon the ashes of another's downfall. You suspect she orchestrated it, Gareth said, more statement than question. I suspect nothing I cannot prove, Fenwick replied. But suspicion is often where truth begins its journey toward the light. I intend to look more carefully into the matter, quietly, without drawing Corinne's attention until I have gathered something solid enough to bring before the Alpha. Gareth considered this for a long moment, before nodding firmly. Then I will help you however I can. I have carried guilt of my own since that night, for not speaking louder in Elena's defense when it might have mattered. If there is a chance to correct that mistake now, even years later, I intend to take it. The two men began their quiet investigation carefully over the following weeks, speaking discreetly with servants who had worked within the pack house 7 years earlier, searching old records for any inconsistency that might reveal the truth Corinne had worked so hard to bury. Progress came slowly, as most of the direct evidence had long since been destroyed or hidden, but small pieces began emerging nonetheless, fragments of a larger picture neither man could yet fully assemble. Meanwhile, Damien's own doubts continued growing steadily, fed by dreams he could not shake, and inconsistencies he could not fully explain away. He found himself, more and more often, walking through the old garden Elena had once tended, now overgrown and neglected, a physical reminder of everything he had lost the night he chose pride over patience, judgment over genuine investigation. You spend too much time dwelling on the past, Corinne told him one afternoon, finding him standing alone among the overgrown roses that Elena had once cared for so lovingly. The pack needs an Alpha, focused on the future, not haunted by decisions long since made. Perhaps the pack needs an Alpha, willing to correct his mistakes, Damien replied, his voice quieter than usual, rather than one who simply continues forward while ignoring the possibility that he was wrong. Corinne's expression tightened slightly at his words, though she quickly smoothed it back into practiced calm. You were not wrong, Damien. You acted on the evidence before you, as any responsible Alpha would have done. And if that evidence was false? Damien asked, turning to look at her directly for the first time in this conversation. If someone deliberately deceived me, deceived this entire pack, for their own purposes, what then, Corinne? For just a moment, something flickered across Corinne's face, quick enough that Damien almost missed it entirely, but not quite. Fear, perhaps, or something closer to panic, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced immediately by her usual composed expression. "Such speculation serves no purpose," she said smoothly. "The matter was settled 7 years ago. Dwelling on impossible questions only weakens your position as alpha." Damien said nothing further, though he watched her walk away with a new wariness he had not felt before, a suspicion slowly crystallizing into something more solid, more dangerous to whatever careful deception had been maintained for 7 long years. He did not yet know the full truth of what had happened that night, but he understood, with growing certainty, that the truth was not what he had been told, and that someone close to him had benefited greatly from a lie that had cost him everything that truly mattered. That night, as Damien stood once again at his window staring out over the territory he ruled, he made a quiet decision that would set events into motion neither he nor Corinne could yet predict. He would find the truth, no matter how long it took. Elena deserved that much, even after 7 years of silence, even if it was far too late to undo the damage his hasty judgment had caused. A few weeks into their quiet investigation, Fenwick and Gareth finally found a promising lead. An older servant named Priya, who had worked within the pack house for over 20 years, mentioned during a careful conversation that she recalled seeing Corinne moving through the Luna's private chambers late one night, several days before Elena's trial, well before any official inspection had supposedly taken place. "I did not think much of it at the time," Priya admitted, her voice lowered even though they spoke privately within her small quarters. "Advisors move through many parts of the pack house, and I assumed she had legitimate business there. But now that you mention the timing, it does seem strange that she would be in the Luna's chambers, so far in advance of when she claimed to have discovered those letters." Fenwick exchanged a meaningful glance with Gareth, both men recognizing the significance of what Priya had just revealed. "Would you be willing to share this information directly with the Alpha, if it became necessary?" Fenwick asked carefully. Priya hesitated, fear flickering across her weathered face. "Corinne holds considerable influence now. If she learns I spoke against her, my position here, perhaps even my safety, could be at risk." "We understand your hesitation," Gareth said gently, "but consider this. If Corinne truly orchestrated a false accusation against an innocent Luna, forcing her into exile while pregnant, what protection does silence truly offer you? Advisors who manipulate truth once rarely hesitate to do so again, whenever it serves their purposes." Priya considered this for a long moment, before finally nodding, though clearly still uneasy about the risk involved. "I will speak the truth, if asked directly, but I would prefer this remain quiet until you are certain enough to act. I have no wish to accuse someone so powerful without solid ground beneath my words." Fenwick and Gareth thanked her for her courage before departing, both men aware that they now possessed a crucial piece of evidence, though still not quite enough to bring a formal accusation before the entire pack. Corinne's position remained too strong, her influence over Damien too deeply entrenched, for a single servant's memory to overturn 7 years of carefully maintained deception. Unfortunately, word of their quiet inquiries did not stay entirely contained. A younger servant, eager to curry favor with Corinne in hopes of advancement, mentioned in passing that Fenwick had been asking unusual questions about the night of the Luna's trial. Corinne received this information with outward calm, though inwardly, alarm began spreading through her thoughts like a rapidly growing fire. That night, alone in her private quarters, Corinne paced restlessly, considering her options carefully. 7 years of careful manipulation could not be allowed to unravel now, not when she had finally secured the influence and comfort she had worked so tirelessly to obtain. She could not eliminate Fenwick's suspicions directly, without drawing far more dangerous attention to herself, but she could, perhaps, ensure that whatever evidence he gathered never reached a point where it became truly dangerous. She began, carefully and quietly, tightening her control over various aspects of pack administration, ensuring that any documents Fenwick might seek to examine required her direct approval first. She also began cultivating closer relationships with several younger pack members, building a loyal following who owed their positions directly to her patronage rather than tradition or merit, a network she could rely upon if her position ever came under serious threat. Damien, unaware of the quiet investigation unfolding around him, continued wrestling privately with his own growing doubts. unaware that others within his pack had already begun uncovering pieces of the truth he desperately sought. He did not yet know how close Fenwick and Gareth had come to solid proof, nor did he realize how carefully Corinne was working to ensure that proof never fully materialized. The pack itself continued its slow decline, crops failing more frequently, disputes growing sharper between families. The invisible bond between alpha and territory stretched thinner with each passing season. Some elders whispered privately that the land itself seemed to be punishing Blackwood for an injustice that had never been properly corrected, though such talk remained cautious, careful never to reach ears that might report it directly to either Damien or Corinne. Far away, in the quiet village of Ashwood's Edge, Elena remained entirely unaware of the doubts finally beginning to stir within the husband who had once cast her aside, focused instead on raising two remarkable sons who were growing, each day, closer to discovering a truth of their own that would eventually lead them directly back to the very territory their mother had fled 7 years earlier. A sharp scream cut through the quiet afternoon air of Ashwood's Edge, sending birds scattering from the trees near the village square. Cale, now 16 years old and taller than most grown men in the village, dropped the wood he had been carrying and turned toward the sound instantly, every instinct in his body snapping to alert attention. Beside him, Ronan had already begun moving, his expression sharp with a focus that mirrored his brother's. Near the edge of the village, where the tree line marked the boundary between settled land and untamed forest, a group of younger children had been playing, when a large, unfamiliar wolf emerged from the shadows between the trees. This was no ordinary forest creature. Its size, its posture, the barely restrained aggression radiating from its stance, all marked it clearly as a rogue, a wolf who had abandoned or been cast out from pack structure entirely, answering to no laws, no restraints, no loyalty beyond its own dangerous instincts. The children scattered in terror, but one small girl, barely 5 years old, had frozen in place, too frightened to move, as the rogue wolf advanced steadily toward her. Cale and Ronan arrived at the scene within seconds, their long legs covering the distance faster than should have been possible for boys their age, though after 16 years of careful discipline, both had learned to move without drawing too much obvious attention to their unusual speed. There was no time now, however, for careful restraint. The rogue wolf's attention had fixed entirely on the frightened child, and Cale understood instantly that hesitation would cost a life that deserved every chance at protection. He felt something shift within himself, a sensation he had never fully experienced before despite years of quiet anticipation that this moment would eventually arrive. His body responded, before conscious thought could fully catch up, transforming in a rush of controlled power that surprised even himself, fur rippling across his skin, his frame expanding into the powerful shape of a wolf, larger than any other 16-year-old in the village could have possibly produced. Beside him, Ronan shifted as well, his own transformation slightly quieter, more controlled, though equally powerful in its final result. The rogue wolf paused, clearly startled by the sudden appearance of two young wolves matching its own considerable size, hesitation flickering through its aggressive posture for just a moment. Cale used that moment, positioning himself directly between the threat and the frightened child, his low growl carrying a warning clear enough that even a rogue understood its meaning. Ronan circled wide, moving to flank the intruder from the opposite direction, his approach calm and calculated despite the danger of the situation. The rogue wolf's gaze shifted between the two brothers, clearly recalculating its chances now that its intended target was protected by two capable defenders, rather than a single frightened child. Villagers began arriving at the scene, drawn by the earlier screams, their expressions shifting rapidly from fear to stunned confusion as they witnessed two familiar village boys standing transformed, holding their ground confidently against a dangerous rogue wolf, twice the size of any threat the village had faced in recent memory. The rogue wolf, sensing that the balance of the confrontation had shifted firmly against it, finally retreated back into the tree line, disappearing into the forest as quickly as it had emerged. Cale and Ronan remained tense for several long moments, ensuring the threat had truly departed, before finally allowing themselves to relax, their transformed bodies shifting back into their human forms, amid a crowd of villagers who stared at them, with expressions caught somewhere between gratitude and undisguised shock. Elena arrived moments later, having heard the commotion from her small shop near the village center, her heart pounding with fear, until she saw her son standing safely amid the gathered crowd. Relief flooded through her immediately, followed just as quickly by a different kind of concern, as she registered the expressions surrounding her sons, no longer simply curious about unusual strength, but now confronted directly with undeniable proof that these boys carried power far beyond anything typical village bloodlines could produce. "What exactly did we just witness?" asked one father, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and unease as he looked between the twins and Elena. "Village boys do not shift with that kind of size, that kind of control, not at 16 years old, and certainly not without years of formal pack training." Elena searched for words, her mind racing through explanations that might satisfy the crowd without revealing the full truth she had protected so carefully for 16 years. But before she could speak, old Garrick, now even more elderly than he had been years earlier, stepped forward, his sharp eyes studying the twins with an expression of quiet certainty. "I suspected as much, years ago," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Strength like this comes from alpha bloodline, strong alpha bloodline. These are no ordinary village children, and I suspect their mother has known this truth far longer than she has ever admitted to any of us." All eyes turned toward Elena, waiting for her response, the careful secrecy she had maintained for 16 years now hanging by an increasingly fragile thread in front of the entire village. Cale and Ronan, still catching their breath from the encounter, looked toward their mother as well, understanding intuitively that whatever answer she gave next would change everything about how the village perceived their family from this moment forward. "Yes," Elena said finally, her voice steady, despite the weight of admission finally leaving her lips after so many years of careful silence. "Their father carried strong alpha blood. I have never denied this, though I chose, for reasons I believed necessary at the time, not to discuss the full details of his identity, or the circumstances of our separation." "And will you discuss them now?" Garrick asked gently, though the question carried clear weight, given the dramatic display the entire village had just witnessed. Elena looked at her sons, seeing in their expressions not fear or anger, but a quiet, patient curiosity that told her clearly they were ready, finally, to learn the truth she had protected them from for their entire lives. She took a deep breath, understanding that the careful walls she had built around their past could no longer hold against the reality of what had just occurred. "Perhaps it is time," she said quietly, more to herself and her sons than to the gathered crowd around them. "Perhaps it is finally time for the whole truth to come out, at least between the three of us, if not the entire village just yet." The crowd slowly dispersed following her words, though whispered conversations continued throughout the village for the remainder of the day, speculation growing about the true identity of the twins' father and the circumstances that had brought their mother, alone and pregnant, to Ashwood's Edge so many years earlier. Elena led her sons back to their small cottage, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and apprehension at the conversation she knew could no longer be postponed. That evening, with Mabel present for quiet support, having aged gracefully over the years but remaining as sharp and steady as ever, Elena finally sat her sons down and began telling them the full story she had kept hidden for their entire lives. She spoke of Blackwood, of the pack she had once called home, of the man she had loved deeply, before pride and deception tore their family apart, before it had even truly begun. Cale's expression hardened with each detail she shared, anger building steadily as he learned the full extent of the injustice that had shaped his mother's suffering, and, by extension, his own childhood spent in careful hiding, rather than the pride and comfort that should have accompanied strong alpha bloodline. Ronan's reaction proved quieter, more contemplative, though no less affected by the weight of truth finally being revealed after 16 years of careful silence. "Our father banished you," Cale said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "While you were pregnant with us, based on lies from someone who wanted your position for herself. That is what I believe happened," Elena confirmed, "though I never received confirmation beyond my own certainty of my innocence. I do not know what has happened at Blackwood since that night, whether the truth has ever come to light, whether Corinne still holds the influence she gained through her deception." Ronan remained quiet for a long moment, processing everything his mother had shared. "We deserve to know the truth completely," he said finally. "Not just what happened to you, Mother, but what has happened since. Whether our father ever discovered his mistake, whether the woman responsible ever faced consequences for what she did." "What are you suggesting?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already understood the direction her son's thoughts were moving. "I am suggesting we go to Blackwood," Ronan said, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he proposed. "Not to reveal ourselves immediately, but to observe, to understand the truth of what has happened there over the past 16 years, before we decide what role, if any, we wish to play in that territory's future." Cale nodded firmly in agreement, his earlier anger settling into something more focused, more determined. "We are strong enough now to protect ourselves, whatever we might discover there. And Mother, you deserve to know the truth as much as we do, whether it brings you peace or simply confirms the injustice you have carried alone for far too long." Elena looked between her two sons, seeing clearly the strength and determination they had inherited from both their parents, strength that had remained carefully hidden for 16 years, but could no longer be contained, now that the truth had finally emerged into the light. She felt fear at the thought of her sons walking into the very territory that had once cast her aside so cruelly. But she also felt something else, a quiet pride at watching them stand ready to face that truth directly, rather than continuing to hide from it indefinitely. "If you are truly determined to do this," she said finally, "then I will not stand in your way. But you must promise me caution, both of you. Whatever anger you carry toward your father, toward Corinne, toward the injustice that shaped all of our lives, channel it into wisdom rather than recklessness. Discover the truth first. Decide what to do with it afterward." Both sons nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of their mother's request, and as the fire crackled quietly beside them that evening, the three of them began, together, planning a journey that would eventually lead the twins directly back to the territory of Blackwood, carrying with them a truth that had waited patiently, for 16 long years, to finally reshape the destiny of an entire pack. The following weeks passed in careful preparation, Elena teaching her sons everything she remembered about Blackwood's customs, its layout, the names of elders who might still remain loyal to the old ways, rather than whatever influence Corinne had built over the years. Mabel contributed her own knowledge, gathered from decades of experience within pack politics, before she had chosen her quieter life in Ashwood's Edge. "You must not reveal your true names upon arrival," Elena warned repeatedly, worry evident in her voice each time the subject arose. "Corinne will recognize the connection instantly if she hears the names Cale and Ronan spoken in connection with Blackwood's missing Luna. Choose different names, at least until you understand enough about the situation to know when revealing the truth becomes safe." "We understand, Mother," Ronan assured her patiently, though this was not the first time she had repeated this particular warning. "We will move carefully, observe first, act only when we are certain of what we are truly facing." Cale, more restless than his brother as the day of departure approached, paced frequently around their small cottage, his mind clearly already anticipating the journey ahead. "I only wish we could move faster," he admitted one evening. 16 years is a long time for injustice to remain unaddressed. Every day we delay feels like another day that woman continues benefiting from what she stole from you. "Patience does not mean weakness, Cale," Elena reminded him gently. "Rushing into unfamiliar territory without proper understanding could endanger both of you, and would accomplish nothing toward correcting the wrong done to our family. Trust your brother's caution as much as your own determination." On the morning of their departure, Mabel embraced both young men warmly, her eyes glistening with emotion she rarely allowed herself to show so openly. "I have watched you both grow from infants into remarkable young wolves," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "Whatever you discover at Blackwood, whatever path you choose once you learn the full truth, know that you carry with you the strength of two lives who love you deeply, and the wisdom of a mother who protected you at tremendous personal cost. We will return," Cale promised firmly. "Whether we bring good news or simply confirmation of old injustice, we will return to you both, Mother and Mabel, before making any permanent decisions about our future." Elena held her sons close one final time before their departure, memorizing the feeling of their embrace, as though trying to carry it with her through the uncertain days ahead. "Be careful," she whispered. "Trust each other above all else. Whatever you find at Blackwood, remember that your strength comes not just from your father's bloodline, but from everything I have tried to teach you about wisdom, patience, and genuine loyalty." With final embraces exchanged and supplies carefully packed, Cale and Ronan set out from Ashwood's Edge that morning, following the same general direction their mother had fled 16 years earlier, though moving now with purpose and confidence rather than desperate fear. Elena watched them disappear over the same hills she had once stumbled down in exhaustion and despair, her heart aching with worry even as pride swelled within her at the strength and determination her sons carried forward into whatever awaited them at the territory of their birth. The journey itself proved far easier for the twins than it had been for their mother so many years before, their combined strength and careful planning allowing them to move steadily and safely through territories that had once posed serious danger to a lone, pregnant, exiled Luna. They spoke little during the travel, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them at their destination, the weight of 16 years of hidden truth pressing steadily closer with every mile that passed beneath their steady footsteps. 3 armed guards blocked the northern road the moment Cale and Ronan approached Blackwood's border, spears lowered with practiced precision, as suspicious eyes studied the 2 unfamiliar young men, standing confidently before them. "State your business," the lead guard demanded, his gaze flicking between the twins with obvious wariness at their imposing size and calm demeanor. "We seek work," Ronan answered smoothly, having rehearsed this exact moment many times during their journey. "We heard Blackwood's warriors are stretched thin these days, and we are skilled fighters looking for a pack willing to take on capable outsiders." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unaccustomed to strangers requesting entry so directly, especially strangers who carried themselves with such unusual confidence. "Names," the lead guard demanded finally. "I am Eric," Ronan said, using the false name he and his brother had settled upon during their travels. "This is my brother, Finn." The guard studied them a moment longer before gesturing for another warrior to fetch someone with authority to evaluate the newcomers properly. They waited in tense silence, Cale's jaw tight with barely concealed anticipation at finally standing on the very territory that had cast their mother into exile so many years earlier. Ronan placed a steadying hand on his brother's shoulder, a silent reminder of the caution their mother had insisted upon before their departure. Eventually, an older warrior arrived, his weathered face and sharp eyes suggesting decades of experience within pack hierarchies. He studied the twins carefully, his gaze lingering on their unusual height and the barely restrained power evident in their posture. Something flickered across his expression, recognition perhaps, though he said nothing about it directly. "I am Gareth," the older warrior introduced himself. "Senior warrior of this pack. You claim to seek work as fighters. Show me what you can do." Without hesitation, Cale and Ronan demonstrated their abilities in a controlled sparring match against 2 of Blackwood's own warriors, their movements precise and powerful enough that a small crowd gathered to watch the impressive display. Both brothers had spent years perfecting careful restraint, and now, finally free to show a portion of their true strength, they moved with an efficiency that left the watching crowd murmuring with obvious admiration. Gareth watched the demonstration with keen interest, his expression thoughtful throughout. When the brief match concluded, he approached the twins directly, his sharp eyes studying their faces with an intensity that made Ronan slightly uneasy. "Where did you learn to fight with such skill?" Gareth asked. "This is not typical training for common village fighters." "Our mother insisted on discipline from an early age," Cale answered carefully, sticking close to the truth without revealing anything dangerous. "She believed strength without proper control causes more harm than good." Something in this answer seemed to strike Gareth deeply, his expression shifting briefly before he composed himself once more. "Wise teaching," he said quietly. "I will vouch for your admission into the pack's warrior ranks, on a probationary basis. Prove your loyalty and skill, and permanent positions will follow." The twins thanked him formally, careful to maintain the composed demeanor they had practiced extensively before their arrival. As Gareth led them toward the barracks where new warriors were housed, Ronan noticed the older wolf glancing back at them repeatedly, an expression of quiet contemplation crossing his weathered features each time. Over the following days, Cale and Ronan settled carefully into their new roles within Blackwood's warrior ranks, observing everything around them with careful attention, while maintaining the humble demeanor of simple outsiders grateful for the opportunity to prove themselves. They learned quickly that the pack's atmosphere carried an undercurrent of tension entirely different from the peaceful simplicity of Ashwood's Edge, disputes flaring more easily between families, an underlying unease permeating even routine daily interactions. They also began, carefully and cautiously, gathering information about the pack's current leadership. They learned that Damien remained alpha, though rumors suggested he had grown increasingly withdrawn, and troubled over recent years, a stark contrast to the confident, decisive leader many older pack members remembered from earlier times. They learned too of Corinne's significant influence, her position as the Alpha's closest advisor, granting her authority that many considered unusual for someone who held no formal leadership title. She controls far more than her position should allow, Ronan observed quietly one evening, as he and Kale shared a meal away from other warriors who might overhear their conversation. Every decision seems to pass through her hands eventually, even matters that should belong entirely to the Alpha's judgment. Our mother's instincts about her were correct, Kale replied grimly. Whatever she did 7 years ago, she has spent every year since consolidating power that should never have belonged to her. Their first direct encounter with Damien occurred nearly 2 weeks after their arrival, during a routine pack gathering where the Alpha addressed his warriors about upcoming border patrol assignments. Kale felt his entire body tense the moment Damien entered the hall, recognizing instantly, despite never having seen the man in person before, the unmistakable resemblance between his own reflection and the face of the father who had banished their mother so many years earlier. Damien's gaze swept across the assembled warriors as he spoke, pausing briefly, almost imperceptibly, when it landed on the 2 unfamiliar young men standing near the back of the formation. Something flickered across his expression, confusion perhaps, or the faint stirring of a recognition he could not yet fully place. He continued his address without further pause, though Ronan noticed his father's eyes returning to them several more times throughout the brief gathering. "He noticed us," Kale murmured once the gathering concluded, and they had moved safely away from other warriors. "Did you see how he looked at us? As though he recognized something familiar." "He cannot possibly know the truth yet," Ronan cautioned, though his own voice carried undeniable tension. "But we must be more careful. If our resemblance to him is as obvious as it apparently is, others may begin noticing as well, long before we are ready to reveal ourselves." Their concern proved justified sooner than either brother anticipated. Corinne, ever watchful of anything that might threaten her carefully constructed position, had also noticed the newcomers during the gathering, her sharp eyes lingering on their faces with an assessment far more calculating than simple curiosity. That evening, she summoned Gareth to her private quarters, questioning him directly about the 2 new warriors he had recently admitted into the pack's ranks. "Where exactly did these young men come from?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral despite the intensity of her interest. "Their names, their history, anything you learned during their admission." "They call themselves Eric and Finn," Gareth answered carefully, revealing nothing of his own growing suspicions about the twins' true identity. "Brothers from a village to the south, seeking work as warriors. Their skills proved impressive during evaluation, more impressive than typical village training would suggest." "Impressive how?" Corinne pressed, her interest sharpening further. "Strong bloodline, clearly," Gareth said, though they claim humble origins and offered no further details about their father's identity. Corinne's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at this information, her mind already racing through possibilities that unsettled her more than she wished to admit even to herself. Strong bloodline, arriving unexpectedly, bearing an uncomfortable resemblance to the Alpha himself if the whispers now circulating through the pack house held any truth. She dismissed Gareth quickly, needing solitude to consider the implications of what she had just learned. Alone in her quarters, Corinne paced restlessly, her carefully constructed sense of security suddenly feeling far more fragile than it had only hours earlier. 7 years of careful manipulation, of building influence and eliminating threats before they could fully materialize, and now 2 strangers had appeared from nowhere, carrying strength that spoke unmistakably of Alpha bloodline, arriving at precisely the territory where such bloodline could only originate from one source she had worked desperately to erase from memory. "It cannot be," she whispered to herself, though even as she spoke the words, a cold certainty began settling into her thoughts, a recognition that the past she believed safely buried might finally be returning to demand the reckoning she had spent 7 years successfully avoiding. Determined to confirm her suspicions before taking any drastic action, Corinne arranged for one of her most loyal younger followers, a warrior named Silas who owed his entire position to her patronage, to keep careful watch over the 2 newcomers without drawing their attention. "Learn everything you can about them," she instructed him privately, "where they truly came from, who their mother might be, anything that could confirm or deny what I suspect about their origins." Silas carried out his assignment carefully over the following days, observing Kale and Ronan during training exercises, listening for any careless slip of information during their conversations with other warriors, watching for patterns that might reveal more than the twins intended to share. The brothers, having spent years perfecting careful discretion under their mother's watchful guidance, revealed remarkably little, though Silas noted their obvious close bond, their careful avoidance of any direct questions about their family history, and their occasional shared glances that suggested silent communication about matters they deliberately kept hidden from others. One evening, Silas attempted a more direct approach, engaging Ronan in seemingly casual conversation near the barracks, while other warriors settled in for the night. "Your fighting style reminds me of someone," he said carefully, watching Ronan's reaction closely. "Something familiar about your movements, though I cannot quite place where I might have seen it before." Ronan kept his expression carefully neutral, though internally he recognized immediately the calculated nature of Silas's comment. "Our mother trained us herself," he answered smoothly. "Perhaps you recognize her teaching style from warriors she once knew, long before we were born." "Perhaps," Silas said, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. "And your mother, where does she reside now? Perhaps I could speak with her directly sometime, learn more about this teaching style that produced such capable warriors." "She passed away recently," Ronan lied smoothly, the fabrication rehearsed carefully during their preparations before arriving at Blackwood. "It is a difficult subject for both my brother and myself. I would prefer not to discuss it further, if you do not mind." Silas offered appropriate condolences, though Ronan noted the calculating look that remained in his eyes even as he expressed sympathy. Later that night, once Silas had departed, Ronan found Kale and relayed the conversation carefully, both brothers recognizing immediately the danger of Corinne's growing suspicion. "She knows something is wrong," Kale said grimly, "or at least suspects strongly enough to send someone investigating us directly. We must be more careful than ever now." "Perhaps we are moving too slowly," Ronan admitted, frustration evident in his voice for the first time since their arrival. "The longer we remain here without acting, the greater the risk that Corinne discovers our true identity before we have gathered enough evidence to expose her deception publicly. Then we accelerate our efforts," Kale said firmly. "We have observed enough of this pack's dysfunction, enough of Corinne's excessive influence, to understand that something is deeply wrong here. Now we must find proof, solid enough to bring the truth into the open, before she finds a way to eliminate us as a threat entirely." The brothers began, over the following days, taking greater risks in their investigation, carefully approaching older pack members who might remember details from the night of their mother's banishment. They found, eventually, an aging servant named Priya, who revealed cautiously, once she understood their genuine desire for truth rather than simple gossip, that she had long suspected Corinne's involvement in fabricating evidence against the former Luna. "I told 2 elders about my suspicions, years ago," Priya admitted quietly, during a careful conversation, held away from other prying ears. "Fenwick and Gareth, if you know them. They began investigating quietly, though I do not know how far their efforts progressed, before Corinne apparently tightened her control over pack records and communications." This revelation gave Kale and Ronan a crucial new direction, and they sought out Fenwick discreetly the following day, finding the elderly wolf tending quietly to his garden, away from the busier sections of the pack house. Fenwick studied the 2 young men carefully as they approached, his sharp eyes immediately noting details about their appearance that clearly triggered recognition he had not expected to encounter. "You carry a resemblance that troubles me," Fenwick said carefully, once they had exchanged initial introductions. "A resemblance to someone whose absence has haunted this pack for 7 long years now." Kale and Ronan exchanged a quick glance, understanding that continued deception with this particular elder would serve little purpose. "We believe you may have known our mother," Ronan said carefully, choosing his words with deliberate caution, despite the risk involved in revealing even this much truth. "A woman once wrongfully accused and banished from this territory." Fenwick's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, then dawning realization, then something that looked remarkably like relief after years of carrying unresolved guilt. "Elena," he whispered, the name clearly significant, despite having gone unspoken within these walls for 7 long years. "You are her sons, the children she carried when she was forced from this territory. We are." Cale confirmed quietly, relief evident in his own voice at finally being able to speak the truth openly, with someone who might genuinely help their cause. And we have returned seeking justice for the wrong done to our mother, though we have kept our true identity hidden, until we understood enough about the current situation here to act wisely. Fenwick nodded slowly, his mind clearly racing through the implications of this unexpected revelation. Then perhaps our separate efforts can finally combine into something powerful enough to expose the truth that has remained buried for far too long, he said. Gareth and I have gathered pieces of evidence over the years, though never quite enough to bring a formal accusation against someone as carefully protected as Corinne has become. Your arrival, and whatever additional truth you carry with you, may be exactly what our efforts have been missing. A soft scraping sound woke Ronan in the middle of the night, his senses instantly alert despite the deep exhaustion of days spent training and investigating simultaneously. He lay still, listening carefully, and identified the sound as careful footsteps moving through the barracks toward the small chest where he and Cale kept their few personal belongings. Someone was searching through their things, deliberately and quietly, believing both brothers to be soundly asleep. Ronan opened his eyes just enough to identify Silas crouched near their chest, carefully sorting through folded clothing and simple supplies, clearly searching for anything that might reveal more about their true identity. Ronan remained still, controlling his breathing carefully, waiting to see what Silas might find or do next, understanding that revealing his awareness too soon might only alert Corinne's spy to greater caution in the future. Silas found nothing incriminating, as the brothers had been careful to leave no written evidence of their true names or origins among their belongings, but his search itself confirmed the depth of Corinne's suspicion, and the lengths she was apparently willing to go to uncover the truth. Once Silas finally departed, satisfied or perhaps frustrated by his failed search, Ronan woke Cale quietly and relayed what he had witnessed. She grows desperate, Cale observed grimly, once his brother finished explaining. Desperate people make dangerous mistakes, but they also become more dangerous themselves, willing to take greater risks to protect what they have built. We must move faster now, before her desperation turns into direct action against us. The following days brought rapid progress in their combined investigation with Fenwick and Gareth, the four of them meeting carefully in secluded locations to piece together the fragments of evidence gathered over 7 years, combined with the fresh perspective the twins brought to the situation. Priya agreed, finally, to provide a formal written testimony regarding what she had witnessed the night before Elena's trial, her courage bolstered by the knowledge that Elena's own sons now stood ready to support her claims directly. There is more, Fenwick revealed during one such meeting, having spent recent days searching more aggressively through old pack records now that he understood the stakes involved. I found discrepancies in the formal documentation from that period. Records that should exist, detailing a proper investigation into the accusations against Elena, simply do not exist at all. No formal inquiry was ever conducted, despite pack law requiring such investigation before any Luna could be banished on accusations of betrayal. That absence itself is evidence, Gareth pointed out. Corinne rushed the entire process, specifically to avoid proper scrutiny, understanding that a genuine investigation would likely have revealed the fabricated nature of her accusations. Cale studied the gathered documents carefully, his analytical mind, honed by years of careful observation under his mother's patient teaching, quickly identifying additional patterns within the evidence. Look at the timeline here, he said, pointing to specific dates recorded in the old documents. Corinne was already positioning herself for greater influence within the pack administration, well before the supposed discovery of those incriminating letters. This was not a hasty decision made in a moment of opportunity. This was planned, carefully, over an extended period. The group continued their careful work over the following week, gradually assembling a case solid enough to finally challenge Corinne's carefully maintained position within the pack. But their efforts did not go entirely unnoticed. Corinne, increasingly paranoid about the newcomers whose resemblance to Damien grew more unmistakable to her each time she observed them, began taking more direct action to protect herself from whatever threat they represented. She approached Damien directly one evening, her expression carefully arranged into practiced concern. I have grown worried about those 2 new warriors, she said, Eric and Finn. If those are even their true names, something about their sudden arrival, their unusual strength, their evasiveness about their family history, troubles me deeply. I believe they may pose a genuine threat to this pack's security. Damien studied her carefully, his own growing suspicions about Corinne herself, making him increasingly cautious about accepting her assessments at face value. "What threat specifically do you believe they represent?" he asked. "I cannot say for certain," Corinne admitted, though her tone suggested far more confidence than her words implied. "But their arrival coincides suspiciously, with renewed questions being raised about matters long since settled. I believe it would be wise to remove them from the pack entirely, before whatever agenda they carry has the opportunity to fully manifest." This suggestion troubled Damien more than Corinne likely anticipated. His own growing doubts about the true circumstances of Elena's banishment made him increasingly wary of any suggestion to eliminate potential sources of information before he understood their significance. "I will observe them myself," he said finally, before taking any drastic action based on suspicion alone. Corinne's expression tightened slightly at this response, clearly not the outcome she had hoped to achieve, though she said nothing further to press the matter, understanding that pushing too hard might raise questions about her own motivations that she desperately wished to avoid. She departed the conversation with growing unease, recognizing that her influence over Damien's decisions, while still considerable, no longer carried the absolute authority it once had during the earliest years following Elena's banishment. That same evening, as fate would arrange it, Damien found himself observing a training session where Kale and Ronan demonstrated their skills against several of Blackwood's most experienced warriors. Watching them move with such precise, powerful coordination, seeing the unmistakable resemblance in their features that he had noticed weeks earlier but had not yet allowed himself to fully consider, something within Damien's chest tightened with a recognition he could not quite articulate but felt with undeniable certainty. After the training session concluded, Damien approached the twins directly, for the first time since their arrival, his expression carefully neutral despite the storm of questions building within his mind. "Your fighting style is impressive," he said, studying their faces closely as he spoke. "Remind me again, where exactly did you both learn such skill?" Kale and Ronan exchanged a brief glance, understanding intuitively that this conversation carried far more significance than simple casual curiosity from their alpha. "Our mother taught us," Ronan answered carefully, watching Damien's reaction closely. She believed strongly in discipline and control, alongside raw strength and speed. "Your mother," Damien repeated slowly, something flickering behind his eyes that neither brother could quite identify with certainty. "And where might I find this remarkable teacher, if I wish to understand more about her methods?" The question hung heavily in the air between them, and both brothers understood clearly that they now stood at a crucial crossroads in their careful plan. Revealing too much too soon could endanger everything they had worked to achieve, yet continued evasion risked deepening whatever suspicion had clearly already taken root within their father's mind. "Perhaps," Kale said finally, choosing his words with deliberate care, "that is a conversation better suited for a more private setting, when you have time to hear a story that may prove more complicated than you currently anticipate." Damien studied both young men for a long, silent moment, the weight of unspoken recognition passing between them, though none of the three had yet spoken the truth aloud directly. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Come to my private study this evening, after the pack is settled for the night. I believe, perhaps, we have much to discuss that extends well beyond simple training methods." The brothers spent the remaining hours before their meeting in careful, urgent conversation with Fenwick and Gareth, weighing the wisdom of revealing their full identity so soon, against the risk of losing whatever opportunity this unexpected invitation represented. "He clearly suspects something already," Fenwick observed, once the twins had explained the encounter. "Better perhaps that the truth comes from you directly, in his own private study, than through some other channel he cannot control or fully trust." "But we still lack the complete evidence needed to expose Corinne entirely," Ronan pointed out, pacing restlessly as he considered their options. "If we reveal ourselves now, before we can present proof of her deception alongside our identity, she may find some way to twist the situation, to convince him that our claims are simply an attempt at manipulation rather than genuine truth." Gareth considered this carefully before responding. "Perhaps you need not reveal everything at once. Test his sincerity first. See whether genuine guilt and doubt truly exist within him, as we have long suspected, before committing to full disclosure of your identity and our combined evidence against Corinne." Kale nodded slowly, appreciating the wisdom in this cautious approach. "We will gauge his character this evening," he agreed. "If he shows genuine remorse, genuine willingness to hear difficult truths, we will know, it is safe to proceed toward full revelation. If he remains defensive, unwilling to question his past decisions honestly, we will know we must gather overwhelming proof before risking exposure. As evening approached, both brothers prepared themselves carefully for the encounter ahead, reviewing everything their mother had taught them about patience, about channeling strong emotion into wise action rather than impulsive reaction. Cale, in particular, found himself wrestling with complicated feelings he had not fully anticipated, a strange mixture of anger toward the father who had wronged their mother so grievously, and an unexpected curiosity about the man himself, separate from the injustice that had shaped their entire understanding of him. "What do we say if he asks about our mother directly?" Cale asked, as they made their way through the quiet pack house toward Damien's private study. "Do we tell him she lives? That she has raised us these 16 years, believing herself permanently separated from any chance at justice?" "We tell him only what feels necessary in the moment," Ronan answered carefully. "Let his own words guide how much truth we choose to reveal tonight. We have waited 16 years for this reckoning. We can afford patience for a few more hours, if patience serves our ultimate goal more wisely than haste." Unbeknownst to the brothers, Corinne had already learned of the planned meeting through Silas, who had overheard Damien instructing a servant to prepare refreshments for a private late-evening conversation with the two newcomers. The news struck her with immediate alarm, and she spent the afternoon pacing her quarters, considering desperately how to intervene without revealing the full extent of her own anxiety about what such a meeting might expose. She briefly considered approaching Damien directly, attempting once more to convince him of the supposed danger these strangers represented, but she recognized quickly that her previous attempt had already weakened her credibility on this particular subject. Pressing further, without new evidence to support her concerns, risked drawing more suspicion toward herself, rather than away from the twins she desperately wished to discredit. Instead, she settled on a more cautious approach, positioning herself near enough to Damien's private study that evening to potentially overhear portions of the conversation, while maintaining enough distance to avoid direct detection if anyone happened to notice her presence. She told herself this was simply prudent caution, protecting the pack from potential threats, though some quieter part of her recognized the fear driving her actions far more than any genuine concern for Blackwood's well-being. As she settled into her hidden position, within a shadowed alcove not far from Damien's study, she found herself remembering, despite years of successfully suppressing such memories, the night she had first placed those fabricated letters among Elena's belongings. She had told herself then that ambition justified the deception, that she deserved the influence and comfort that came with rising to the position of the Alpha's most trusted advisor. She had convinced herself, over 7 years, that the ends had justified whatever damage her lies might have caused to an innocent woman and her unborn children. Now, waiting anxiously in the shadows while two young men who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Damien prepared to enter his private study, that carefully constructed justification felt increasingly fragile, threatening to collapse entirely under the weight of consequences she had never truly allowed herself to consider during those early years of triumphant ambition. Meanwhile, Cale and Ronan arrived at the heavy wooden door leading to Damien's private study, exactly as the pack house settled into its nighttime quiet, the corridors empty of the usual daytime activity that might otherwise complicate the private nature of the conversation ahead. Cale knocked firmly, and after a moment's pause, Damien's voice called for them to enter, carrying a weariness that suggested he too had spent the intervening hours wrestling with difficult anticipation about what this meeting might ultimately reveal. Ronan glanced once at his brother before pushing the door open, a silent exchange passing between them that needed no words after 16 years of shared understanding. Whatever waited beyond that door, whatever truth finally emerged from years of careful silence, they would face it together, exactly as their mother had raised them to face every challenge that life had placed before them. "Sit," Damien said, gesturing toward 2 chairs positioned across from his own, his expression unreadable in the dim candlelight of his private study. Cale and Ronan complied silently, both bracing themselves for whatever conversation might unfold in the tense quiet that followed. Damien studied them for a long moment before finally speaking again, his voice carrying a rawness that suggested careful preparation had failed to fully steady his nerves. "I have spent 7 years dreaming of a woman's face," he said quietly. "A woman I banished from this territory, in a decision I have questioned more with each passing season. Tell me honestly, both of you, who is your mother?" The directness of the question left little room for further evasion, and Cale and Ronan exchanged one final glance before Ronan answered, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Our mother's name is Elena," he said. 16 years ago, she was Luna of this pack, before she was accused of betrayal and banished into the wilderness while carrying your children." Damien's face went pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, as though needing physical support to remain upright under the weight of this confirmation. "You are my sons," he whispered, the words carrying disbelief, grief, and something that sounded almost like desperate hope, all tangled together. "Elena survived. She raised you both, alone, all these years." "She survived," Cale confirmed, his voice carrying an edge of the anger he had carried since first learning the full truth of his mother's suffering. "Barely. At first. She nearly died in the wilderness, before finding refuge with a kind healer, who helped her build a new life, far from Blackwood's borders. She raised us in secrecy, teaching us to hide our strength, fearing always that revealing our true identity might bring danger rather than justice." Damien sat in stunned silence for several long moments, processing the enormity of what he was hearing. "I believed her guilty," he said finally, his voice breaking with emotion he had clearly suppressed for years. "I acted on evidence presented to me, evidence I never properly investigated before, condemning her to a fate I have regretted every single day since." "The evidence was fabricated," Ronan said firmly, "by Corinne, your closest advisor, who benefited directly from our mother's downfall, rising to a position of influence she could never have achieved, while a legitimate Luna remained in place." Damien's expression hardened at this direct accusation, though not with disbelief, Ronan noted carefully, but rather with a dawning recognition of suspicions he had apparently already begun forming independently. "I have wondered about Corinne's role in this for months now," he admitted. "Small inconsistencies in her explanations, timing that never quite made sense, but I lacked proof solid enough to challenge someone who has become deeply entrenched within this pack's administration." "We have proof," Cale said, producing the carefully compiled evidence he and his brother had gathered alongside Fenwick and Gareth over recent weeks. "Testimony from a servant who witnessed Corinne accessing our mother's private chambers, days before the supposed discovery of incriminating letters. Documentation, proving no formal investigation was ever properly conducted, despite pack law requiring such process before any Luna could be banished. Records showing Corinne positioning herself for greater influence well before your decision was even made." Damien examined the evidence carefully, his expression growing darker with each document he reviewed, the full scope of Corinne's manipulation finally becoming undeniably clear before his eyes. 7 years, he said quietly, more to himself than to his sons. 7 years I trusted her judgment, relied on her counsel, while she manipulated me into destroying the woman I loved and denying myself the chance to know my own children. "What will you do now?" Ronan asked carefully, watching his father's reaction closely, understanding that this moment would determine whether the difficult journey they had undertaken would ultimately lead toward justice or further complication. Damien looked up at his sons, something resolute finally settling into his expression, despite the grief and guilt still evident beneath the surface. "I will bring this evidence before the full pack council," he said firmly. "Corinne will answer for her deception publicly, before every wolf whose trust she has manipulated for her own selfish ambition. And I will do everything within my power to make right what I destroyed, though I understand fully that some wounds may never completely heal, no matter how sincere my efforts toward redemption." Before further conversation could continue, however, a sound at the study door interrupted them, and all three turned to see Corinne standing in the doorway, her face pale with the realization that she had been discovered listening from her hidden position nearby. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand that her carefully maintained deception now stood fully exposed before the very people with the power to destroy everything she had built over 7 years of careful manipulation. "Damien," she said, her voice trembling despite her obvious attempt to maintain composure. "Whatever these strangers have told you, surely you understand that fabricated stories can easily be constructed by anyone seeking to destabilize this pack's leadership." "Enough," Damien said, his voice carrying an authority that immediately silenced her further protest. "I have heard enough tonight to understand exactly what you did, Corinne. The only question remaining is whether you will admit your guilt honestly before this pack, or force us to expose every detail of your deception through formal proceedings that will only make your eventual punishment more severe." Corinne's composure finally cracked entirely. 7 years of careful performance collapsing under the weight of undeniable exposure. "I did what was necessary," she said, her voice rising with desperate justification. Elena never appreciated the position she held, never understood how to properly wield the influence available to a Luna of this pack's standing. "I simply took what I believed I could use more effectively." "You destroyed an innocent woman's life," Cale said, standing from his chair, his voice carrying barely controlled fury despite his mother's careful teachings about channeling anger into wisdom rather than impulsive reaction. "You forced her into exile while pregnant, nearly costing her life and ours in the process, simply because you coveted a position you had no rightful claim to." Corinne looked between the twins and Damien, understanding finally that no further denial or justification could salvage the situation she now found herself trapped within. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, all pretense of confidence finally abandoning her entirely. "Now," Damien said, his voice cold with a fury that had been building steadily since the moment his sons first revealed their identity. "You will face this pack's council tomorrow morning, where you will answer fully for 7 years of manipulation and deception. And you will pray, Corinne, that the council shows more mercy than I currently feel inclined to offer you myself." Damien summoned guards immediately to escort Corinne to secure quarters where she would remain under careful watch until the morning proceedings, ensuring no opportunity remained for her to flee the territory or attempt any further manipulation before facing formal judgment. Once she had been led away, the study fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Damien sinking slowly back into his chair, the full weight of the evening's revelations finally settling completely over him. 16 years, he said quietly, staring at nothing in particular, as he processed everything that had unfolded. 16 years, I have carried guilt for a decision I never fully understood, and now, I discover the woman I trusted most deeply, after Elena's exile, was the very architect of that betrayal from the beginning. Cale and Ronan remained quiet, watching their father wrestle visibly with emotions that had clearly been suppressed for years, uncertain how to navigate this unfamiliar territory of watching a man they had spent their entire lives resenting suddenly appear so genuinely broken by the truth finally laid bare before him. Ronan, ever the more measured of the two brothers, finally spoke. "Our mother never stopped believing in her own innocence," he said carefully, "even during the darkest days of her exile, even when survival itself seemed uncertain. She held on to the truth of who she was, teaching us the same conviction throughout our childhood. She would want you to know that truth has finally emerged, regardless of how long it took to reach the light." Damien looked up at his son, something raw and vulnerable crossing his features. "Does she know you came here? Does she know you sought this reckoning on her behalf?" "She knows," Cale confirmed, his earlier anger softening slightly in the face of his father's evident genuine remorse. "She gave us her blessing to seek the truth, though she cautioned us carefully against reckless action. She remains in Ashwood's Edge, the village where we grew up, unaware still of exactly how tonight's confrontation has unfolded." "I must go to her," Damien said immediately, urgency creeping into his voice. "Once matters here are properly resolved, once Corinne has faced whatever judgment the council decides, I must travel to Ashwood's Edge myself, to offer whatever apology and restoration lies within my power to give." "That decision belongs to our mother," Ronan said carefully, though not unkindly. "She has built a life for herself and for us, far from Blackwood's politics and danger. Whether she wishes to reopen that chapter of her life, whether she is willing to consider forgiveness after 16 years of exile, is not something either of us can decide on her behalf." Damien nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his son's caution, despite the urgency he clearly felt to make amends as quickly as possible. "Then I will proceed carefully," he said. "First, justice for Corinne's deception, properly conducted before the full council. Then, whatever attempt at reconciliation your mother is willing to permit, offered with patience and genuine humility rather than desperate haste." The three of them talked long into the night, Damien asking careful questions about the years he had missed, about Elena's survival and eventual establishment of a new life, about his son's childhood and the careful teachings that had shaped them into the capable, principled young men now sitting across from him. Cale found his earlier anger gradually softening, not disappearing entirely, but tempering into something more complex, as he witnessed his father's genuine grief and evident desire to properly understand everything he had missed. I do not forgive easily, Kale admitted honestly, as the conversation finally began winding down in the late hours of the night. What you did to our mother caused suffering that shaped our entire childhood, forcing her to raise us in constant fear of discovery. That is not easily set aside, regardless of how genuine your current remorse appears. I do not expect easy forgiveness, Damien replied quietly. I only hope, given time and consistent effort, that I might eventually earn back some measure of the trust I so carelessly destroyed 16 years ago. Whatever time that requires, I am prepared to offer it, for both of you, and for your mother, if she is ever willing to grant me that opportunity. As dawn began breaking over Blackwood's territory, Fenwick and Gareth arrived at the study, having been summoned to prepare for the formal council proceedings that would take place within hours. Both elderly men expressed quiet satisfaction upon learning that Damien now possessed full knowledge of both his son's identity and Corinne's extensive deception, understanding that years of careful, cautious investigation had finally culminated in the reckoning they had long hoped to achieve. The council will convene at midday, Fenwick informed them. Word must be sent throughout the pack, ensuring every wolf entitled to witness such proceedings has opportunity to attend. Corinne's judgment must be conducted properly, transparently, precisely the kind of formal process she denied Elena all those years ago. Damien nodded firmly in agreement. See that it is done exactly as pack law requires, he instructed. No shortcuts, no hasty conclusions. This time, justice will be served with the full weight and proper procedure it deserves. The Great Hall of Blackwood, the very same hall where Elena had once been condemned 16 years earlier, filled quickly with every pack member capable of attending. Word of the dramatic overnight developments having spread rapidly throughout the territory, despite efforts to maintain some measure of order until the formal proceedings could begin. Corinne stood at the center of the stone floor, guards positioned carefully at her sides, her earlier composure replaced entirely by a pale, tense expression that betrayed the full extent of her fear. Damien entered the hall with Kale and Ronan beside him, and a collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd as pack members finally saw, in full daylight and close proximity, the unmistakable resemblance between the Alpha and the two young warriors who had arrived so mysteriously weeks earlier. Whispers spread rapidly, understanding dawning across many faces, even before any formal announcement had been made. Damien raised his hand for silence, and the hall quieted gradually. Tension thick in the air, as everyone present sensed the significance of whatever was about to unfold. 16 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly, despite the emotion evident beneath his controlled tone. I made a decision in this very hall that I have come to understand was built entirely upon lies and manipulation. I banished my Luna, Elena, based on evidence I now know was deliberately fabricated. The murmurs grew louder, shock rippling through the crowd as Damien's words confirmed suspicions many had quietly harbored for years but never dared voice openly. These two young men, Damien continued, gesturing toward Kale and Ronan, are my sons, twins, born to Elena after her banishment, raised in secrecy and hardship because of a grave injustice this pack committed against an innocent woman. Fenwick stepped forward next, presenting the carefully compiled evidence to the assembled council of elders, detailing methodically the timeline of Corinne's deception, from her early positioning for greater influence, to the fabricated letters, and the complete absence of proper investigation before Elena's banishment. Priya, standing bravely among the crowd despite her earlier fears, confirmed her testimony publicly when called upon, her voice trembling but resolute as she described witnessing Corinne's suspicious activity in the Luna's chambers, well before the supposed discovery of incriminating evidence. Corinne, given opportunity to respond to the mounting evidence against her, attempted several times to offer explanations, but each justification crumbled quickly under the weight of documentation and testimony now assembled against her. Finally, recognizing the futility of further denial, she fell silent, her earlier desperate composure abandoning her entirely, as the full council prepared to render judgment. Corinne, the eldest council member said finally, his voice heavy with the gravity of the moment, you stand accused of fabricating evidence against an innocent Luna, of manipulating pack leadership for personal gain, and of causing immeasurable suffering to Elena and her children through your selfish ambition. How do you answer these charges? Corinne remained silent for a long moment, her eyes downcast, before finally speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. I cannot deny what the evidence clearly shows, she admitted. I did what I believed necessary to secure a position. I felt I deserved more than Elena ever appreciated. I understand now the depth of harm my actions caused. Though understanding arrives, I recognize, far too late to undo the damage already done. The council deliberated briefly before announcing their decision, stripping Corinne of all positions and privileges within Blackwood, banishing her permanently from the territory, under conditions considerably harsher than those Elena had faced 16 years earlier, though without the added cruelty of forcing her out while pregnant and vulnerable as Elena had been. Guards escorted her from the hall amid a heavy, charged silence, the pack finally free of the manipulation that had quietly undermined its stability for 7 long years. Once Corinne had been removed from the proceedings, Damien turned back to address the full assembly once more, his expression carrying both relief and continued grief over everything that had been lost during the years of deception now finally exposed. This pack owes Elena a debt that can never be fully repaid, he said. I intend to travel personally, to seek her forgiveness, to formally restore whatever standing and honor was so wrongfully stripped from her 16 years ago, though I understand fully that some wounds may never completely heal. The assembled pack members murmured their support, many faces showing genuine relief that the truth had finally emerged after years of quiet unease surrounding their alpha's troubled reign. Gareth stepped forward, his weathered face carrying quiet satisfaction at finally seeing justice served after years of harboring doubt about that fateful night so long ago. Elena deserves not just an apology, Gareth said, addressing both Damien and the gathered crowd, but full restoration of her rightful place within this pack's history and future, should she choose to accept it. And these 2 young men, he continued, gesturing toward Cale and Ronan, carry within them the strength and wisdom of both their parents. Whatever role they choose to play in Blackwood's future, this pack would be fortunate indeed to benefit from their leadership. Cale, standing beside his father for the first time in his life, without the weight of hidden identity between them, felt something shift within his chest, a complicated blend of lingering anger toward the father who had wronged his mother, and a cautious, growing respect for the man who had faced this public reckoning with genuine accountability rather than continued denial. Ronan, ever more measured, watched the crowd's reaction carefully, already considering what challenges and responsibilities might lie ahead should he and his brother choose to claim their place within Blackwood's leadership. After the formal proceedings concluded, Damien requested a private moment with his sons before beginning preparations for his journey to Ashwood's Edge. I know I cannot undo 16 years of absence, he said quietly, once they had found a moment of relative privacy away from the dispersing crowd. But I would like the chance to know you both properly, not as strangers who arrived seeking justice, but as my sons, if you are willing to grant me that opportunity moving forward. That will take time, Ronan said honestly, though not unkindly. Trust is not something easily rebuilt after 16 years of absence and the suffering our mother endured because of decisions made in this very hall. But we are willing to see how you conduct yourself moving forward, to judge your character through consistent action, rather than words alone. Damien nodded, accepting this cautious response with visible relief that the door toward eventual reconciliation remained open, even if the path forward would clearly require patience and sustained effort on his part. Then let us begin that journey together, he said, starting with the journey to Ashwood's Edge, where I hope, more than anything, to finally offer your mother the apology and restoration she has deserved for far too long. As Corinne was escorted toward the northern gate for her own banishment, the same path Elena had once walked in sorrow and fear 16 years earlier, she paused briefly near the threshold, turning back to look at Damien and his sons, standing together in the distance. You believe this changes everything, she called out, her voice carrying a bitter edge despite her defeated posture. But ambition does not disappear, simply because one schemer has been removed. Someone else will rise eventually, seeking the same influence I once held. Perhaps you should consider more carefully who you choose to trust moving forward, Damien, before history repeats itself once again. Gareth stepped forward, his expression firm despite his advanced age. This pack has learned its lesson about blind trust and hasty judgment, he said steadily. We will not make the same mistakes twice, Corinne. Take your bitterness elsewhere. It has no place within these borders any longer. Corinne said nothing further, allowing the guards to lead her through the gate without additional protest. disappearing into the same forest that had once nearly claimed Elena's life so many years earlier. Whether she would survive the wilderness or find refuge elsewhere remained uncertain, though few among the assembled crowd expressed much concern for her fate, given the suffering her deception had caused for so many years. With Corinne's banishment complete, attention within the pack house turned quickly toward practical matters of reorganization and healing. Fenwick, given his years of quiet integrity throughout the investigation, was appointed as temporary advisor to help guide the pack through this transitional period, while Gareth continued his role training the pack's warriors, now including Kale and Ronan, formally acknowledged as the Alpha's true sons rather than mysterious newcomers. Word spread quickly throughout Blackwood's territory about the dramatic revelations, and in the days following the council proceedings, an atmosphere of cautious hope began replacing the tension and unease that had characterized pack life for years under Corinne's hidden manipulation. Crops that had failed inexplicably in recent seasons seemed, almost immediately, to show signs of recovery, though whether this reflected genuine mystical connection between pack harmony and the land itself, or simply improved morale translating into more diligent work, none could say with certainty. Kale and Ronan spent the following days adjusting to their new reality, no longer hiding behind false names and careful deflection, but rather being welcomed increasingly as legitimate heirs to Blackwood's leadership. The transition proved emotionally complex for both brothers, particularly Kale, who found himself wrestling with unexpected respect growing for warriors and elders who had shown genuine courage in pursuing truth despite the risks involved, even as he continued processing lingering anger toward his father for the initial injustice that had shaped their difficult childhood. "It is strange," Kale admitted to his brother one evening, as they walked together through the territory that was, technically, their birthright, though it had felt entirely foreign only weeks earlier. "Part of me wants to hate him completely, to hold on to anger as though it were the only appropriate response to everything Mother suffered. But watching him today, seeing genuine grief rather than simple political convenience, I find that anger becoming more complicated than I expected." "Anger and forgiveness are not mutually exclusive," Ronan replied thoughtfully. "We can acknowledge the wrong done to our mother, while still recognizing genuine effort toward change and accountability. Mother taught us that wisdom means holding complexity, not forcing simple answers onto complicated situations." As preparations began for the journey to Ashwood's Edge, Damien insisted on traveling with only minimal escort, wanting the reunion with Elena to carry the weight of genuine humility, rather than the intimidating presence of a full Alpha's procession. "She left this territory alone and vulnerable," he explained to Fenwick, who had questioned the wisdom of traveling with such a small party. "I will not arrive at her doorstep, surrounded by warriors and pomp, as though seeking to overwhelm her with my authority, rather than approaching with the humility this reconciliation requires." Kale and Ronan agreed to accompany their father on the journey, both wanting to witness firsthand how their mother would receive the man who had wronged her so grievously, so many years earlier, curious and anxious, in equal measure, about how this long-delayed reunion might finally unfold, after 16 years of separation and suffering. On the morning of their departure, Fenwick and Gareth gathered at the northern gate to see them off, both elderly men, carrying expressions of quiet satisfaction at witnessing the beginning of what they hoped would become genuine healing for a family torn apart by deception so many years earlier. "Travel safely," Gareth said, gripping Kale's shoulder firmly. "And remember, whatever your mother decides regarding your father, this pack stands ready to welcome her back with the honor she was always owed." "Thank you," Ronan replied sincerely, "for believing in the truth, even when believing carried real risk to yourselves. Our mother will want to know exactly how much courage it took for both of you to pursue justice on her behalf, even after so many years had passed." With final farewells exchanged, Damien and his sons set out from Blackwood's northern gate, following the same path Elena had once walked in desperate exile, though this time the journey carried hope rather than despair, and purpose rather than fear, as they moved steadily toward the reunion that would finally determine whether 16 years of separation could give way to genuine reconciliation. A sharp knock at her cottage door made Elena's heart jump with sudden alarm, her hands pausing mid-stitch on the fabric she had been working with all afternoon. Visitors rarely arrived unannounced in Ashwood's Edge, and something about the firm, deliberate nature of the knock sent an unfamiliar tension through her chest. She set aside her sewing carefully and moved toward the door, uncertain what to expect. When she opened it, the sight before her stole the breath entirely from her lungs. Cale and Ronan stood on her doorstep, both alive and clearly unharmed, relief flooding through her immediately at seeing her son safely returned. But standing just behind them, his expression carrying a vulnerability she had never witnessed during their years together as husband and wife, stood Damien himself, older now, weathered by years of guilt and regret, yet unmistakably the man she had once loved with her entire heart, before betrayal tore their lives apart. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking slightly on her name, as though speaking it aloud, after 16 years carried more weight than he could easily bear. "I have come to ask for your forgiveness, though I understand fully that I have no right to expect it, after everything I allowed to happen to you." Elena stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment, a torrent of emotions crashing through her simultaneously. Shock, old grief resurfacing unexpectedly, and beneath it all, a cautious curiosity about what exactly had transpired to bring her estranged husband to her doorstep after so many years of silence. "Come inside," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt internally. "All of you. I believe there is a great deal we need to discuss." Once settled around her small kitchen table, Cale and Ronan explained everything that had unfolded since their departure from Ashwood's Edge, detailing their careful infiltration of Blackwood's warrior ranks, their partnership with Fenwick and Gareth, the mounting evidence against Corinne, and finally the dramatic confrontation and public exposure of the deception that had shaped 16 years of unnecessary suffering. Elena listened in silence throughout, her expression shifting through disbelief, vindication, and finally, a complicated grief for years that could never be recovered, no matter how thoroughly the truth had finally emerged. "Corinne has been banished," Damien added quietly, once the twins finished their account. "Stripped of all position and influence, sent from Blackwood's territory permanently. The Pack Council has formally acknowledged the injustice done to you, Elena. Your title as Luna remains yours to reclaim, should you choose to accept it." Elena studied Damien carefully across the table, searching his face for any trace of the man who had once condemned her so swiftly without proper investigation, comparing it against the visibly humbled figure now sitting before her, offering apology and restoration after years of separation and hardship. "You believed lies over your own wife," she said finally, her voice carrying old pain that had never fully healed despite years of building a new life, far from Blackwood's borders. "You gave me no chance to properly defend myself, no genuine investigation, before condemning me to exile while carrying our children." "I know," Damien said, meeting her gaze directly despite the shame evident in his expression. "There is no justification I can offer that excuses the speed and carelessness of that decision. I can only tell you that I have carried guilt over that choice every single day since, long before I understood the full truth of Corinne's manipulation. Discovering that manipulation only confirmed what I had already begun suspecting, that I failed you catastrophically through my own pride and hasty judgment, regardless of whose lies contributed to that failure." Elena remained silent for a long moment, processing the weight of his admission, the genuine remorse evident in his voice and posture, rather than simple political convenience or desperate desire to reclaim lost status. "I built a life here," she said finally. "A quiet, peaceful life, far from pack politics and the constant pressure of leadership. I raised our sons to value wisdom and patience, above ambition and power. I am not certain I wish to return to the world that so nearly destroyed all three of us." "I do not ask you to return immediately, or even eventually, if you decide against it," Damien said carefully. "I ask only for the opportunity to earn back whatever trust remains possible between us, at whatever pace you find comfortable. Whether that eventually leads to your return to Blackwood, or simply to peaceful understanding between us as parents to these remarkable young men, either outcome would represent more than I believe I truly deserve after everything that happened." Mabel, who had been quietly present throughout the conversation, finally spoke, her wise, weathered voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had witnessed many difficult reconciliations throughout her long life. "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, dear," she said gently to Elena. "Nor does accepting an apology require immediate restoration of everything that was lost. Perhaps consider this conversation simply the beginning of a longer process, rather than a decision requiring immediate resolution." Elena nodded slowly, appreciating the wisdom in Mabel's careful guidance. "I am willing to consider reconciliation, she said finally, addressing Damien directly. But it will require time, consistent effort, and genuine patience on your part. I will not simply return to the life I once had as though 16 years of hardship never occurred. Whatever relationship we eventually build, it must be built new, acknowledging fully everything that happened, rather than pretending we can simply return to who we once were. Damien nodded firmly, relief evident in his expression, at her willingness to consider a path forward, however cautious and gradual that path might prove. Whatever time and patience that requires, he said, I am prepared to offer it fully. Over the following weeks, Damien remained in Ashwood's Edge, staying respectfully at a modest inn, rather than presuming upon Elena's hospitality, visiting daily to spend time with his sons, and cautiously rebuild connection with Elena herself, through patient conversation, rather than demanding immediate forgiveness. The villagers of Ashwood's Edge, initially wary of the Alpha's presence among them, gradually warmed, as they witnessed his genuine humility and consistent effort, understanding slowly the remarkable story of injustice and eventual redemption unfolding quietly within their peaceful community. Cale, over these weeks, found his own relationship with his father evolving steadily, old anger gradually softening into cautious respect as he witnessed consistent, patient effort rather than empty promises. Ronan, ever thoughtful, spent considerable time discussing pack governance and leadership philosophy with Damien, discovering shared values around wisdom and careful judgment that gave him growing confidence about their family's potential future together, whatever form that future eventually took. 3 months after Damien's arrival in Ashwood's Edge, Elena finally agreed to travel to Blackwood herself, not necessarily to permanently reclaim her position, but to witness firsthand the pack her sons might eventually lead, and to formally address the community that had once condemned her so unjustly. Her arrival at Blackwood's gates drew a crowd far different from the fearful, uncertain onlookers who had witnessed her banishment 16 years earlier. Instead, pack members gathered with genuine warmth and respect, many offering quiet apologies for their own silence during her original trial, understanding fully now the courage it would have taken to speak against Corinne's manipulation at the time. Standing once more in the great hall where her exile had originally been declared, Elena addressed the assembled pack with quiet dignity, acknowledging both the pain of her past exile and her cautious hope for genuine healing moving forward. I do not return today to reclaim what was lost, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. I return to witness the pack my sons may someday lead, and to offer this community the chance to build something better than the fear and manipulation that once nearly destroyed us all. The council, with Fenwick now serving as permanent advisor given his integrity throughout the investigation, formally restored Elena's title and honor, acknowledging publicly the grave injustice she had suffered while leaving the question of her permanent role within Blackwood open to her own timeline and comfort. Cale and Ronan, meanwhile, were formally recognized as rightful heirs to Blackwood's leadership, their combined strength, wisdom, and integrity offering the pack genuine hope for a stable, principled future after years of hidden manipulation and unstable leadership. In the months that followed, Elena divided her time between Ashwood's Edge, where Mabel remained a cherished friend and confidant, and Blackwood, where she cautiously rebuilt connection with Damien while watching her sons grow steadily into their new roles as respected warriors and future leaders. The relationship between Elena and Damien progressed slowly, carefully, built upon consistent effort and patient understanding, rather than rushed reconciliation, though genuine warmth gradually returned between them, as trust, once shattered so completely, began finding new foundation upon which to rebuild. Cale, in time, found himself embracing his role within Blackwood more fully than he had initially anticipated, his natural leadership abilities and strong sense of justice earning him growing respect among the pack's warriors and elders alike. Ronan, meanwhile, took particular interest in governance and diplomatic matters, working closely with Fenwick to help rebuild trust and stability throughout the territory, his thoughtful, measured approach proving invaluable during the delicate transitional period following Corinne's exposure and banishment. Years later, when Damien eventually stepped back from active leadership, the Pack Council unanimously supported Cale and Ronan, sharing joint leadership of Blackwood, an arrangement unusual in Pack tradition, but reflective of the unique bond and complementary strengths the twin brothers had demonstrated throughout their journey toward reclaiming their birthright. Elena, present for the formal ceremony marking this transition, watched with quiet pride as her sons accepted the responsibility and honor that had once seemed impossibly distant during their childhood of careful hiding and constant caution. "We would not stand here today," Cale said during his acceptance address to the assembled pack, "without the strength and wisdom our mother instilled in us throughout years of hardship and uncertainty. Whatever leadership we offer this pack moving forward, it is built entirely upon the foundation of patience, integrity, and genuine care for justice that she taught us from our very first days." Ronan added his own words, addressing the crowd with the same thoughtful consideration that had guided him throughout their journey. This pack learned, through painful experience, the danger of blind trust and hasty judgment. We intend to lead differently, valuing genuine investigation over convenient assumption, patience over impulsive reaction, and above all, the kind of careful wisdom that ensures no injustice, like the one our mother suffered, ever occurs again within these borders. As the ceremony concluded and the pack began its celebration of new leadership, Elena stood quietly beside Damien, watching their sons receive the genuine respect and support of the community that had once so nearly destroyed their family before they had even taken their first breath. Whatever complicated history remained between herself and Damien, whatever healing still required patient continued effort, she felt, finally, a deep and settled peace at witnessing her sons step into the strength and integrity she had worked so tirelessly to instill within them throughout 16 years of careful, loving sacrifice. The story of Blackwood's fall into deception and eventual redemption became, over time, a lesson passed down carefully throughout the pack's history, a reminder to future generations of the danger inherent in hasty judgment and blind trust, and the remarkable strength that could emerge from patience, integrity, and unwavering love, even in the face of the deepest injustice. Elena's twin sons, born in exile and raised in careful hiding, had returned not merely to reclaim a birthright stolen from them before birth, but to build something stronger and wiser than what had existed before, a legacy built upon truth rather than deception, and genuine strength rather than manipulated power.